Yes, Mr. Millett, when you're ready.
Good morning, members of the panel. Good morning, Ms. Wray. Yesterday, when we finished, I was asking you about Carl Stokes and the scope of his work. To your recollection, did Carl Stokes' instructions include considering the external facades of buildings?
I don't believe they explicitly did, no.
Now, can we then look, please, at your first witness statement and go, please, to page 9, paragraph 44. Now, there you say, occasionally fire safety issues arose during the project that might be referred to me for comment. On these occasions, I would seek and obtain the advice of our specialist fire expert, Carl Stokes, typically by instructing him to produce issue-specific reports that I would supply back to the asset management team. I've endeavoured to set out these fire issues below, and then you go on to do that. Now, by project there, do you mean the Grenfell Tower refurbishment project?
Yes, I did.
Yes. Are you able to explain what you understood to be Carl Stokes' role during the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower?
He didn't have a designated role. It was really more that he was our fire risk assessor. He was our ready access to fire specialist knowledge. So if I wanted a second opinion on something, or if the project team had asked for him to engage or produce a report, then that would be a bespoke issue that he responded to.
And how was that bespoke issue the subject of instructions? How would he be instructed to advise in respect of such a bespoke issue?
Usually his instructions came from me. Occasionally, I believe he may have been instructed directly by my colleague Claire Williams, the project manager, often at the request of Peter Madison, but usually it came through me. I would ask him to do a specific piece of work. He would produce a report. It would often go straight back to Claire and perhaps to Peter, and I would receive a copy of the report.
I see. And how was that work invoiced? Was it invoiced separately, or was it treated as part of his general retainer as a fire risk assessor?
He submitted a monthly invoice with a breakdown of all of the work that he was invoicing for. So it would have been set out just on the normal invoice. I don't think it was charged to a separate budget. I think it was just all part of the same fire safety.
Yes, I see.
Budget.
Can we go back to the consultant's brief, please? Yep. That's CST 705, and look at page 7. And on page 7, let's look at paragraph 1.8 under the heading Client Meetings. I wonder if it could be expanded a little. Thank you. It says there, regular meetings will be held between the project manager, the H&S advisor, and the consultant to discuss possible issues, monitor progress, and review the service provided. The meetings will be held monthly and will be chaired by the TMO project manager and minuted by the TMO, H&S advisor, and the consultant will be expected to attend at no additional cost. Were monthly meetings actually held with Carl Stokes, as specified here in this brief?
Initially, they were for at least, I think, 6 or 8 months, well into the medium risk project. After that, I think the project manager went off to do other things. So it ended up being largely Carl Stokes and myself. And we would have a lot of ongoing daily contact in view of the ongoing programme and any queries that I had with regard to what he was doing. So there aren't minutes after that period for a long period, but that's because we were having such regular contact by telephone and in person that we didn't have... And by then it was he and I would have been the team meeting, and because we were having endless dialogue, then minutes weren't produced, unfortunately.
And who was the TMO project manager referred to here?
I believe that was Valerie Sharples, who'd been involved in the original procurement exercises for the high and the medium risk programmes.
But did she attend any meetings that you held with Carl Stokes at any stage?
I think she attended the progress meetings that were minuted, or one of her representatives, I think, for a period Abby Acosta might have also been representing Valerie Sharples.
Right. Now, you said that there were no minutes kept of those meetings. Is that right?
If we were having a project meeting and the project manager was available, I would have minuted the meeting. The reality is that sort of a year and a half into the fire risk assessment programme, the project manager was doing other things and sort of was no longer directly involved.
Right. Mr. Stokes has told the inquiry that he would be sent minutes of these meetings. Is that right?
Any that were minuted, I would have obviously distributed to all of the attendees, yes.
Now, I'd like to look at some of those meetings in a little bit more detail, starting in 2010, if I may. The first meeting that we have a record of took place on the 22nd of June 2010, so in fact before the date of the production of this consultant's brief.
Yeah.
And the next day, on the 23rd of June, Carl Stokes wrote to you by email. Let's look at that. CST 401886. And he sends you an email. This is in fact the 24th of June. Janice, good afternoon, how are you? Please could you have a quick look at the attached to see if you are happy with it? This should stop me asking you lots of questions. Mm-hmm. Carl, and the attachment says Employee Fire Training TMO PDF. Mm-hmm. Now let's look at that document. This is at CST 401887. And it's a letter, as you can see, dated the 23rd of June 2010. Subject, Employee Fire Training Personnel, Emergency Evacuation Plans, PEEPS, and the Lift Maintenance, Servicing and Testing Policy in TMO-controlled buildings. Dear Miss Wray, after our meeting yesterday, Tuesday 22nd June 2010, at 10:30 at the Hub 300 Kensal Road, North Kensington, I would like to clarify the following items and issues about employee induction and refresher fire training. The policies and documents covered today also have a relevant for fire warden training which is given to selected employees. It looks from that, and I'll continue with the rest of it later, but it looks from that Carl Stokes was meeting you in his capacity as a fire risk assessor for CS Stokes and Associates Limited. Is that right?
My recollection is that during the Salvis period, all of our contact was through Salvis. So I didn't actually know Carl Stokes other than his name on the bottom of print. He made contact with me and said that he was a consultant in his own right, and if we were going to be tendering, he just wanted to give me information about his company and he would like to have the opportunity to tender. So I think that I sort of said, well, happy to chat to you. I'm happy to consider it. I'm happy to consider anybody who can go on the tender list. So I think this is notes of a conversation that we had. I think when he was working for Salvis, I got the impression that he didn't always have all of the information that I was providing to Salvis. So he was asking more questions about how we operated, what our staff did, what our maintenance regime was, right, etc.
What was the purpose of the meeting? Do you recall?
I don't really think there was a purpose. I think he just wanted to get more information about how we operated, and obviously he wanted me to give strong consideration to including him on the tender list.
Right. So did you ask him, or did you discuss with him in what capacity he was coming to a meeting with you?
I don't recall, other than what I've just outlined, really. He was eager to meet because I knew he'd been our assessor and he provided a number of assessments via Salvis. Then I'm happy to meet with people generally. Okay.
Did you realise he was attending that meeting not as a Salvis employee or contractor, but as a sole practitioner?
I think I would have done, yes.
Yes. And you would have done anyway, having seen this letter on the 24th of June, yes?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes. Now, this was at a time, wasn't it, after Salvis had completed the high-risk FRA programme, yes?
Yes, that's right.
Yes. And is it right that at that time, so late or late-ish June 2010, you had decided to tender for a new fire risk assessor, but hadn't yet undertaken the tender process?
I believe so.
Yes. And I think at that stage you were still some 3 or 4 weeks away from issuing the consultant's brief, July 2010.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, let's just continue with the letter if we can. If we look at the second paragraph, it goes on. When completing any fire risk assessments for buildings under the control of the Tenants Management Organisation, TMO, of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea in future, and where TMO employees are present in the buildings, the information in this letter will be used as a basis of the fire training and fire warden section of the document. The information on lifts will be used in the relevant section for fixed installations as well as in the section on disabled persons and their evacuation procedure when using lifts. The PEEPS documents again will be used as evidence in the disabled persons section. Now, just pausing there again, if you hadn't yet gone through the tender process and appointed a fire risk assessor to undertake further FRAs for the TMO, why were you meeting him to discuss matters to be used in his fire risk assessments?
We met when he was clearly doing some information gathering. This is his take on what I said and the information I provided. This wasn't me asking him to come back and say how would this look. It was literally, from my perspective, it was information gathering where he wanted to know what our plans were, what more detail of how the organisation worked, and what policies and practices we had in place.
Right.
This is clearly looks like him trying to sell himself to me, but that's not really how I took it.
Did you go through the same process of meeting other applicants to give them the same information that you'd given Carl Stokes?
I would have been available to.
Yes, but did you?
I don't recall doing it.
Did
no.
you tell any of the other applicants that you'd provided one of their number with the information we can see set out and reflected in this letter, and make sure that they had the same information?
No, I didn't, but Salvas were one of the other applicants, so two of them had this information and the others didn't.
Yes.
No, I don't recall that I did.
Why is that?
I've no idea, really. I don't... He was doing groundwork where he obviously was hoping that this work would come his way. But when we did the procurement exercise, when we interviewed, we were fair and we tried to treat people equally. So I would have been aware, if we hadn't had this conversation, Salvas would have been the people who'd had a lot more information than the others. But I would have tried to make sure that we treated everybody consistently. And as you know, we had a colleague from housing in the council and another professional services colleague, so we were all assessing everybody independently against the same standards.
You say Salvas had this information. Did you actually provide Salvas with the information that you see reflected in Carl Stokes' letter?
Over the course of the time that they were working for us, yes, they needed this in order to produce the assessments that they were producing.
Do you accept that it doesn't place all applicants in a tender process on a level playing field if you only provide one, possibly two, of the applicants with information that you don't provide to the others?
Potentially.
No, not potentially. Actually, it actually doesn't. It actually distorts the playing field because you're giving one or two of the applicants an informational advantage, aren't you?
But the point I was going to make is a lot of this would be covered verbally when we did our introduction to at the beginning of every interview. I would have said, this is the kind of organisation we are, this is where we're at with fire risk assessments. I would have covered a great deal of this and they would have had an opportunity to question me further. So, sorry, that's why I'm saying potentially, because they wouldn't have had it in writing, but they would have had verbal updates and the opportunity to question me.
Now, we'll look at the letter in a little bit of detail in a moment, but from this letter, would you accept that it would appear at least that Mr. Stokes intended to use the information from your meeting on the 22nd of June 2010 in certain sections of his fire risk assessments?
That's what he's saying.
Yes.
Sorry, can I just ask something? Looking at the first paragraph of this letter,
Yes.
it gives me the impression that it's directed to Mr. Stokes putting together some form of employee induction or refresher fire training, not subsequently doing fire risk assessments. Do you recall anything about that?
I think one of the questions he would have asked me was how we trained our staff, and we did part of the training was annual fire safety training. So you're right, it's worded as if he's making recommendations when he's, I think, reflecting back some of the information that I gave him.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Yes, Mr. Miller.
Yes. And therefore, was your intention at that point that Mr. Stokes would be appointed or might be appointed for 1 year to carry out the fire risk assessments for the medium risk properties?
I didn't have any intention at that stage. As we said, the procurement hadn't happened. Based on my discussions with him, I was happy to add him to the tender list, but that didn't give him any advantage that anyone else had. I hadn't thought beyond that, and it was going to be a fair process.
The information itself that you were giving, whether it went to Mr. Stokes or anybody else, was only ever going to be current for 1 year, wasn't it? Because it was relevant to the medium risk programme, or is that not right?
Some of it will be the approach to PEEPs and fire training may have continued going forward, but yeah, potentially, you're right.
Yes.
Sorry.
Now, we'll come back later to the specific topics in the letter, which are, and I'll count them for you, employee fire training, personal emergency evacuation plans. Now, he says personnel emergency evacuation plans. That might not be an error. Lifts and more general matters. But can I ask you please to look at the end of the letter, where he says, at page 3, in the last paragraph, "I'd like to thank you for all the help you gave to me yesterday, because as we discussed during our meeting, the items covered and policy and procedure documents you showed me will help tremendously to reduce the question I may have needed to ask and gave me a very good understanding of TMO operating policy in relation to health and safety issues." What policy and procedure documents did you give him?
I doubt I gave him any. I gave him verbal information. I didn't prepare any. I mean, he was coming in cold for a chat about how we did things. I'm pretty confident I wouldn't have given him anything.
Same question again. What policy and procedure documents did you show him, even if you didn't give him any?
Well, as you know, we hadn't produced a fire strategy at that stage, so that wasn't something I could have given him. I really don't know, and I really can't think that there was anything obvious that would have related to this that I would have had readily to hand or be prepared to give him. So I'm sorry, I can't help.
You can't help.
No. And as you know, the lift information is information that would have been held by contracts management, building services team. So I wouldn't have had ready access to anything that could have been given.
We'll come back to the lift information in detail later on. Looking more generally at the chronology and moving forwards, on the well, let me just show you something that I've just been prompted with. Can I ask you to go to CST 303077? CST 303077. Now, this is an invoice issued by CS Stokes and Associates Limited, addressed to you, dated the 2nd of July 2010. Can you see?
Yes.
And it says, invoice, as instructed, I've undertaken and completed the fire risk assessment for, and then there are 3 addresses within the TMO stock. In accordance with the Fire Safety Order 2005, from these fire risk assessments, I've produced a significant findings and an action plan for each building. Costs as agreed, net £700, VAT, gross £822.50p. Can you explain that invoice?
No. I have absolutely no recollection.
You've never seen it before?
I must have seen it before. It's addressed to me, but I've absolutely no recollection.
Are you able at all to explain the circumstances in which CS Stokes and Associates was instructed to undertake and complete the fire risk assessments for those buildings shown in that invoice, as at the 2nd of July 2010?
No, I'm not. And I'm looking, this is addressed to me when I was based at 346 Kensington High Street, so I wasn't even based at the hub at that stage. Sorry, I must have had it, but I...
And given that you must have had it, do you accept that you must have known that Mr. Stokes was conducting fire risk assessments for 4 buildings in the TMO stock on his own account as CS Stokes and Associates Limited before the tender process was started?
That seems to be the case. These are all offices or archive storage areas, but I really have no recollection. But you're right, this is what it looks like.
And therefore, taken together perhaps with the letter I've been showing you, might it not be the case that in fact the TMO you had already decided to appoint Mr. Stokes to conduct the medium risk programme even before the tender?
No, absolutely not.
What other explanation is there for his undertaking and completing these 3 fire risk assessments?
I don't know what the explanation is, but that isn't it. I'm sorry.
Right.
Oh, we absolutely hadn't decided. And it wasn't my decision. It was a joint decision, and rightly so.
Now, moving forward in the chronology, can we go please to CST 403061? This is a letter dated the 27th of September 2010, which Mr. Stokes and I discussed at some length repeatedly during his evidence. It's an important letter. And it happened, or it was sent to you, after a meeting with you on the 24th of September 2010 at the Hub. Do you see in the first paragraph that that is what it records?
Yes.
Now, we will examine each of the specific topics in this letter later on in your evidence, but for the moment my question is this. Is it right that at this point, so late September 2010, Carl Stokes still had not been formally appointed as the fire risk assessor?
I don't know. You've got all the documentation. I'm not sure what the dates were. I thought he was appointed on the 23rd of September, but probably hadn't signed the documentation.
Well, let me help you. Can we go to TMO 008422316, please? This is a letter dated the 23rd of September 2010. So it's the day before the meeting.
Okay.
Thank you for and it's to Carl Stokes. Thank you for submitting a fee quotation and attending the interview. Further to satisfactory responses to our additional queries, I'm pleased to inform you that your fee quotation has been accepted, and it is our intention to appoint you to carry out the programme of fire risk assessments on the Council's medium risk blocks. I will prepare your formal appointment, which you should receive within the next week. In the meantime, as discussed, I will endeavour to set up meetings with my colleagues, a project briefing meeting, an introductory meeting with the fire brigade, all of which shall take place as soon as possible.
Yes.
Now, looking at that, this is the 23rd of September. The meeting was on the 24th of September. His letter, as we've seen, was on the 27th of September. It's right, I think, that although you'd sent him the letter of intent,
yes,
the contract hadn't yet been signed.
Yes, you're right.
Yes. Now, let's get back to the letter of the 27th of September, please. CST 403061, please, at page 1. Having referred to the meeting, he goes on to say in the second line as follows: I would like to put in writing the management procedures, topics and issues, etc. we discussed, so that when completing any fire risk assessments for residential buildings under the control of the Tenants Management Organisation, TMO, of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, in future these standards and observations will apply. What did you, just pausing there, what did you expect him to do with this information in his fire risk assessments?
I expected his fire risk assessments to reflect the processes and the training and our approach to maintenance and fire precautions. I was trying to give him as much information as possible so that they would be as comprehensive as possible in relation to each block.
And when you received this letter, did you read it thoroughly and
yes,
ensure that it reflected accurately the information you had given him at the 24th of September meeting?
I would have thought so, yes.
Yes. Now, after this letter, do you recall that there was a meeting that you held to introduce Carl Stokes to the LFB, and that happened on the 8th of October 2010? I'll show you a document.
Okay. I recall that we did, but I don't particularly recall the meeting.
Very well. RBK 30290052, please. Now, this is an email from Janice Wray, that's you, to Anne Muchmore,
Okay.
below. And you're actually sending this on to Miss Muchmore at the top. And we can see the main email below that. And it goes on, and further to our meeting yesterday, can you see the first paragraph?
Yes.
I can confirm that we met with the LFB on 8th of October to introduce Carl Stokes, our new risk assessor. They agreed to produce the minutes for that meeting. However, in order to assist, I sent through some notes which I was hoping they would incorporate into the minutes, but no minutes received yet. My notes are on the attached email below. That email I'm showing you, is dated 26th of January 2011.
Yes.
We need to go to the email on page 2 for the main information. This is an email from you of the 12th of October to Gary Soddo of the London Fire Brigade, copied to Anne Muchmore, subject Friday's meeting with the TMO. Mm-hmm. You see that?
Yes.
And he says, you say rather, Gary, I believe we agreed the following, which you may wish to include in your minutes. And if we look down at paragraph 2, which starts, aim to use same approach as before, can you see the fourth line? And it says this: however, the intention is for the consultant to do as much work in advance of the programme commencing as possible to establish the extent of our fire safety plan preventative maintenance contract and associated asset registers, our inspection regimes, fire safety training programmes, policy on installation of smoke alarm, PEEPs, etc. We're hopeful that this will result in fewer recommendations being made and will allow us to focus our attention on the significant findings. Now, was Carl Stokes supposed to work on all of the TMO housing stock or just the medium risk buildings?
He was appointed for the medium risk buildings, as we discussed yesterday.
Yes. Doesn't look like that from what this paragraph says.
Well, then that's me wording it inappropriately. He was appointed for the medium risk.
Right.
And that was the approach that we were trying to adopt, because if I could just explain, we got, as you probably gathered, we got bogged down in actions. We were getting significant volumes of actions, but often they were repeat actions requesting the same information. How do we train our staff? What is our approach to maintenance? So we thought what we needed to do was provide as much of that information in advance of assessments being produced, so they would be more comprehensive, and then the actions and the significant findings that came out would be what we needed to focus on, rather than a lot of extra. Sorry.
Now, the first paragraph does say that he'd been appointed to carry out the fire risk assessments on the council's medium risk blocks. Yes. But it goes on to say, assessment programme likely to begin on site week commencing 18th of October 2010 and aim to complete in 6 months. So is it right that the intention set out in paragraph 2 was to enable Mr. Stokes to complete the entirety of the medium risk programme by April, essentially, 2011?
Ideally, we wanted it doing as soon as possible in order to be as compliant as possible and to meet the Fire Brigade's deadline, their 3-year deadline.
Yes, I see. And did Mr. Stokes then undertake that work?
Yes.
Now, I want to ask you about the implementation of FRAs and the process of that, a different topic. Okay. Can we start by looking, please, at your first witness statement at page 33, paragraph 148. And you describe here the process of addressing the actions and findings identified by Mr. Stokes. And you say this: the process was that I would identify a property and Carl would attend and send to me an FRA report and a significant findings and action sheet. I would then extract the relevant information and log them as actions on W2, our Civica electronic document and record management system. Each action would be assigned to the appropriate team, who would be advised of the recommended timeframe for completion. The team would then undertake the work and update the system by describing the action as partially or fully complete, and by adding any relevant notes or evidence and returning to the health and safety team. We would then close down the action. Now, looking at the systems that you used for monitoring actions, you say in other parts of your evidence that you used a spreadsheet tracker and the W2 system. Is that right?
The W2 system did not come in until the 1st of August 2013. we recognised the need to have a dedicated workflow, electronic workflow, but unfortunately we didn't actually have a system that we could use. So the company eventually realised the advantages of having such a system that we could have workflows for all sorts of the business.
Right. Can you just give me some dates? So the spreadsheet tracker, was that what you started using straight away in and after October 2010?
That was my recollection, although it may be that I used Word documents as well, because the significant findings and action plans came in as Word documents. So unfortunately, and that's why we needed to have a proper electronic management system, because it was quite difficult to keep a handle on.
And after the W2 system came into effect
Yes.
on the 1st of August 2013, did you continue to use the spreadsheet tracker system?
No, everything from that point onwards, and actually from I think a couple of months prior to that, was loaded into the W2 system and was monitored and progressed in that way.
Right, so from August 2013, you were only using the W2 system?
And what I can't recollect is whether we transferred information in from historical stuff or whether we kept monitoring that separately. I think we did it separately because it was quite an onerous task, because there were still some historic actions outstanding. So I think I was chasing on that as well, but our focus was on the W2 system.
Right. Can you just help me a little bit more on that answer? When the W2 system started on the 1st of August 2013, what information got transferred into it?
My recollection is that we knew it was coming, we'd trialled it, so I think we put in the fire risk assessment action plans that we'd received for at least I'm guessing, but at least the 2 months prior to the introduction, and then from that point onwards we put everything through W2. So we did have a historic spreadsheet, I think, with some historic information that didn't, I might be wrong, but my recollection is it didn't get added to W2, it was monitored separately.
So does that tell us that there was an incomplete information transfer from the spreadsheet tracker to the W2 system when it started in August 2013?
I've really tried to remember, but my recollection is that we didn't transfer all the historic information, but we did still track it.
Yeah, understood.
Yes.
Understood. But the answer to my question is yes, the information transfer was incomplete in some respects.
It wasn't comprehensive, yes.
No. And does that mean that from the 1st of August 2013, you essentially had two systems or two repositories of information, the W2 system and the historic spreadsheet tracker, which was still continuing in parallel?
I think we did, yes.
Yeah, and was that the position until the 14th of June 2017, the night of the fire?
No. No, because eventually, again, eventually the spreadsheet items, to the best of my recollection, were closed down, and all the newer stuff from the date we discussed had gone into W2.
And when do you think all the spreadsheet items were closed down?
I'm sorry, I don't know. I was awash with information and I couldn't give you a date on that.
Now, when you assigned the action to the appropriate team, the FRA action to the appropriate team, how would you do that mechanically? What buttons would you push?
My recollection is that the workflow gave us the opportunity to basically cut and paste the action that came out of the action plan. So it got transposed into the tracker. There was a box where I could provide additional information. So if I thought that perhaps it wasn't clear what action people were required, I might say, could you just make sure that the caretaker checks this or whatever. And then there was a drop-down box where you could reflect the priority, high, medium, low, and there was a corresponding time frame which had been preset against each of those priorities, and then it was allocated to, I can't recall if it was individual or team.
Right.
And then it got sent. Sorry.
I'm so sorry. Would you then send that in a PDF form or as a document, or would you send an email? How would you then transmit that?
The W2 system meant that everybody had their own inbox within the W2 system. So it was sent electronically within the system, and everybody within the organisation was supposed to monitor their own W2 inbox.
I see.
But to supplement that, I would run regular reports. Everyone else had access and opportunity to run their own reports, but status reports for each team, so they would know at that point in time, which I think was probably at least every 2 months, what they'd been allocated, what was completed, what was partially completed, and what was outstanding.
And while the spreadsheet tracker was in use, what system did you use to allocate or assign actions to appropriate teams from that data?
That would have probably had to be done by email because we didn't have another system.
Right. When you were sending spreadsheets, did that include the colour coding of the actions so that each team knew the priority level ascribed to the action,
yes.
whether it was through the spreadsheet tracker or the W2
Yes,
system?
I believe so.
Yes. Can we just look at an example? Now, this, I think, predates the arrival of W2. This is TMO 100023330. This is the composite FRA tracker from mid-March 2013. TMO 100023330.
Yeah.
And we can see that this is, in fact, one that runs till, as I say, till March 2013. You can see that from other parts of the document. You can see the high-risk items in red just on the screen in front of you.
Yes.
Was this the form in which it went to the relevant teams?
I think it must have been.
Right.
But I'm presuming there's there should. Sorry, I was just going to say there should be a legend explaining high, medium, low timeframes. However, all of these people were getting this information regularly, so they knew what the timeframes were.
You say all of these people. Just picking a couple of those. Responsive repairs. Is that repairs direct?
Depending on the timeframe, I don't think in 2012 I'm not sure when they came in.
Right. Who in the repairs direct team would you send this spreadsheet to? Given that this is March 13.
Okay. So Stuart Thompson was our repairs manager, I think, prior to Repairs Direct. So early actions would have gone to him as the responsive repairs manager. Repairs Direct situation frustratingly fluctuated, and I would have gone to them on a regular basis to say who is the most appropriate person to receive this information.
And once Graham Webb was in post as the managing director of Repairs Direct, from January 2016, that's the time, would he receive these spreadsheets, or would he get something else because W2 was on stream by then?
Yeah, he wouldn't have had these. He'd have had extracts from W2. I can't recall who. I think at one stage it was John Tatum. They had a series of responsive repairs managers, and they would have been the people who received the equivalent version of this from W2.
Would you ever send any of these teams, whether it was contracts or whether it was project management or responsive repairs, a copy of the FRA itself or a copy of the significant findings and action plan for particular properties?
Possibly.
Why would you? What would be the circumstances in which you would do that?
It's a very good question. They could request it. They may have requested it. They might be planning some work, so they're trying to collate all relevant information in relation to a specific block. They may have wanted to share it with some new contractors that they were appointing. A variety of reasons, really.
Did the W2 system send you automatic notifications of overdue items?
No, I don't believe it did.
It wasn't programmed to do that?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
Right. So how would you know whether a particular item identified in the significant findings and action plan was overdue?
I would have run a report. It was very simple. There was on the W2 system, there was a very simple way that I could run a report, and I would usually have run a report for everything and then filtered what I wanted.
How often did you run a report after August 2013?
Regularly, because...
Well, how regularly?
God. It eventually got to the stage... Well, I was sending them out to teams. Eventually, I was sending them out to teams, certainly before every Health and Safety Committee meeting. So teams would have been getting their own specific updates at least 2 monthly. I think Barbara would ask for them more regularly than that. I was looking at what was going on and what was being completed on a regular basis. I would receive the completions into my inbox, and I would open each of them individually and would only close them down completely if I was happy that I was confident that the works had been completed, or I might request additional evidence, in which case I would send them back. So if I'd gone and completed quite a lot, which was going to impact on the overall stats, I might then run another report just to see what I need to home in now, who should I chase for the next.
Did you do all that for all 650 odd blocks in the TMO stock that required an FRA?
Yes, because, sorry, I probably didn't make it very clear. When I ran a report, the report could be for the entire system. So then I could filter on specific blocks, or I could filter on what was outstanding, or specific kinds of works, or against individual teams, depending. Yeah.
And yes. And did you have any help in performing that task, printing it off, reducing it, analysing it, deciding what was and wasn't overdue, communicating with the teams?
No, not really.
All you?
Pretty much all me. I mean, my colleagues, Cyril particularly, who was my facilities colleague, but actually sometimes had a little bit more capacity than Adrian or I, was helpful in terms of manually inputting the information and allocating the actions. But I would have said to him, here's a Word document, can you allocate? And I would have told him where they needed to go. But yes, it was just me, really. That sounds quite sad. I don't mean it to sound sad, because everybody in the organisation who received actions had the opportunity to run their own reports. I just was doing it as belt and braces to make sure that they had this information and that they were focusing on it. But yeah, it was pretty intensive.
I was going to ask you how you could do that alongside any of your other work. It sounds like a full-time job.
It was pretty full on, but I didn't let it go. I was fairly dogged about chasing down outstanding actions because I thought it was really crucial, and I would raise it at every opportunity that I could. I'm sure I was a pain, but I did.
Did you ever go to your seniors and say, I'm overstretched here, I need some help?
I may have done, but there just wasn't any budget to be had, so I would, as we said yesterday, I would reprioritise regularly, but fire safety was always at the top of the tree.
Now you mentioned Cyril Morris a moment ago.
Yes.
We'll just pick up on him. Can we please look at your June 2020 statement, TMO 00873-629, page 16, paragraph 65. And you say there, in the second part of that paragraph, whilst everyone could update their own spreadsheet, only Cyril Morris and I could close down actions, and only when sufficient evidence had been provided to confirm completion, Adrian Bowman did not close down actions.
Yes.
Does it follow from that it was your responsibility to monitor that actions were completed so as to decide that they should be closed out?
Yes, unless they were fairly simplistic, and Cyril could close those. I did most of the closing.
Right.
Sometimes we would look at it together, and I would go, yes, I'm happy with that, and then he would do the actual admin.
Right. And was Cyril Morris at your side, as it were, all through the period 2010 to 2017?
I think he started in 2011, I believe, possibly March 2011, and yes, for the rest of that period.
Yes. Now, Adrian Bowman has explained in his statement that he would follow up the completion of actions during his inspection programme. Did he report his findings to you?
Yes.
And how would he do that?
So I think we sort of covered this to some extent in that he would take out the action plan, which, as we know, is a Word document, to the blocks that he was going to be inspecting. and he would identify if what we believed had been completed, and we would. My recollection is that he would add another column, and then and then the information would be taken from that and sent to repairers or sent to wherever it needed to be sent.
Right. Sticking with paragraph 65 of this June 2020 statement, you say, and I've read it to you already, but you say only when sufficient evidence had been provided to confirm completion.
Yes.
How would you decide whether you had sufficient evidence to confirm completion? What would constitute sufficient evidence in that context?
It would depend on the action, really. If it was in relation to housekeeping issues, for example, then I would allocate it to the manager of the ESA and say this needs to be undertaken. Sometimes they would send me photographic evidence. Sometimes the team leader would say, I visited the block yesterday and I can confirm that that's in place. So there was sort of a second tier of checking where that was feasible. Sometimes, if my colleague Adrian happened to be in the vicinity of a block where I had specific concerns or queries, he would divert and go. We just try to use whatever we had available, really. Sorry, I'm not sure that answers your question.
And when teams reported to you that actions were completed, did you yourself undertake any kind of quality check or empirical checks, just even on a spot basis, to ascertain whether the work had been completed satisfactorily?
I would have, if I was going to be in the vicinity, I would tend to pop into local blocks. That I didn't have a lot of opportunity to do that. Adrian was out a great deal of his working week, so I would regularly say, "Oh, where are you going to be? Oh, can I just get you to double check?" So I would often, her man had loads of lists of things to check for me. So yeah,
you were essentially reliant on their judgment.
Yes, but Adrian Bowman was a very experienced and safe pair of hands, really.
Yes.
And there was no way that he would say something had been completed if it hadn't, because he just wouldn't.
So you trusted him?
Absolutely. And we worked together a very long time, and he's totally trustworthy, and I relied on his judgment.
You did. Did you rely on his judgment and trust him to the extent that you never checked his work?
No.
So in what circumstances?
We would do joint inspections.
Would you check his work?
He didn't just do on-site work. He produced the estate staff handbook. He minuted for a period of time the health and safety committee. He had a range of work where we worked quite closely together, and we were a small team, so it was really important that we worked together. But no, I absolutely checked his work, but he was very competent and very experienced.
At what point would an action be considered to be outstanding? Would it be when the action was raised but not remedied, or would it be once the relevant period had passed within which it ought to have been remedied?
From my perspective, if it's not remedied, it's outstanding. It needs to be done. We may not have reached the target date, but it still needs to be done. So from my perspective, that's what I would be using as a basis for outstanding. So
every FRA item is outstanding until completed, regardless of the time frame?
Yeah, it's not completed, is it? So maybe that's my interpretation.
Right. Now, Barbara Matthews describes in her evidence the fact that you sent her monthly a spreadsheet with outstanding actions on it.
Yeah.
You did, did you?
Yeah, I believe so.
Did you ever discuss that spreadsheet, or those spreadsheets, with Barbara Matthews? Do you remember?
Yes, most likely we would have discussed them in regular one-to-ones, or when she was based in another office, but when she worked at the hub, the desk beside me was often empty, so she would sit by me and we would go through a lot of the detail.
Did she offer you support in ensuring that outstanding actions were completed?
She did. We discussed it in detail, in increasing levels of detail, really, at the Health and Safety Committee, particularly after Barbara came along. And she would also meet privately with her peers, and where she saw that there were significant actions, she would make it her business to go and have separate meetings with individuals as well to put pressure on them. So yes, she did.
Right. In her first witness statement, she says, and it's paragraph 33, that she would chase managers if FRA actions were not being closed down as quickly as they should have been. Was that your experience?
Yes, it was.
And were you aware at the time that Barbara Matthews was chasing managers down in those circumstances?
Yes, and she was fairly vociferous in the Health and Safety Committees when she was unhappy with the stats, or she felt that people were still not perhaps giving actions the priority that they needed. I mean, some were complicated and were never going to be closed down in the time frame that was set. And we recognised that, but she always felt there was more we could do, and so she pressed that.
Now, apart from the Health and Safety Committee, or perhaps its precursor, the Health and Safety Operations Committee, can you please explain which committees you would report to about the status of FRA actions?
Those would be the main committees. As we know, we spoke yesterday about there's an asset investment engineering, a kind of precursor to the Operations Health and Safety Committee. But the Health and Safety Committee reported into the executive team by the nature of the chair. So that would have gone up to that level. I also had one-to-one meetings regularly, particularly with the head of contracts management and his Alex Bosmond and his predecessor, Keith Fifield. And I did find some notes, actually, I did keep notes of those kinds of things, because there were often quite a number of issues that we were raising. Some were FRA related and some weren't, but it covered the whole gambit.
You say you did find some notes?
I find some progress meeting notes when I was wading through information recently with Keith Fifield, and I know I kept notes of the meetings.
Right. When you say you found some notes, did you find those in the documents disclosed?
Yeah. When I say notes, I mean electronic. I don't mean...
Not documents. You didn't... Just be very clear about this. You didn't find these documents in your own private...
I don't have any private documents. So that's my fault for misleading. Electronic documents is what I mean.
No, that's very helpful. Now, the purpose of reporting to those committees, the Operations Committee and the Health and Safety Committee, at least during the time they were separate, was that in order to make sure that they were fully informed and could take action and report up?
Yes, absolutely, because that's principally my role, was to monitor and to escalate and to chase and cajole and do everything that I could, but make sure that everybody knew, who had a lot more authority than I had, if there were problems, if there were issues.
And was that always the case, right from the start, 2009, 2010? Yes,
it was, and I think scrutiny was very intense in the beginning, as we've seen, in terms of the council and the fire brigade, but also in terms of the TMO operations board level committee, and I think also TMO board. I was asked to do repeated reports, and then in more recent years, the chief executive did his regular report to board, and he then started always including a health and safety or a fire safety aspect to it. So there were things that were brought to the attention of the elected board members.
Right, which is not the chief executive, of course.
Well, he's presenting it. Yeah. Sorry, it goes via him. Apologies.
Yes, well, we'll see. Now, as of November 2013, which is the date of your fire safety strategy.
Yes.
You I think had a more fixed procedure, didn't you?
Well, yes. I mean, as of the workflow, things were just much easier to manage.
Yeah. Yes. So I see. So chronologically, is this the position that you call it workflow? Let's call it W2. Okay. Came on stream on the 1st of August 2013, and then in November 2013, you produced your fire safety strategy.
Yes.
So things got more organised.
Yes. I mean, it probably practically gave me more time to do the finishing off bits of things that had been kicking around and hadn't been finished.
Let's look at the fire safety strategy of that month and that year. TMO 008300598, please. And I'd like to show you page 10, and on that page, paragraph 14.4.1. You can see at the middle of your screen under FRA action plans, which is part of 14.4, under the first subparagraph there, you can see that it says in the penultimate line, statistics on status of all FRA actions are presented to the Operations H&S Group, the TMO's H&S Committee, and the executive team on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Did anybody set any targets for completion of FRA actions?
No, I don't think we did, because everybody recognised that they needed to be done, and they needed to be done in terms of the priority and the time frame that had been set by the consultant.
Right.
So there wasn't. We wouldn't have been happy until we'd done as many as we could, but because of the nature of the ongoing assessment programme, we were never going to reach zero, because if we got anywhere near that, then we'd get a whole deluge of new assessments and associated actions.
You say statistics on status. Why do you mean there statistics on cleared and outstanding FRA actions?
I think I do.
Yes.
Because certainly when I've been providing them, that's what I've been asked for, is how many were allocated per team, how many were completed partially, how many are outstanding. And then it got a bit more sophisticated, where I was asked to actually clarify the time frames in relation to those that are outstanding.
Was there any discussion of the risk to life presented by the outstanding FRA actions?
There would have been. It really was something that we, did take a lot of time and effort, but and people recognised the importance and the need to comply with the RRO, and also that these things have been identified for a reason. So yes, I think there was universal understanding of how crucial they were.
Well, that's not quite the question. Perhaps my question was a bit shrouded. Why were statistics of cleared and outstanding FRA actions used as the metric, the measure to discuss the status of FRA actions?
I think it's visual, isn't it? Some people just work better with a visual message. If you can see that you've got, what looks like a significant number of potentially high-risk actions outstanding, and you can demonstrate that they've been outstanding for a period, that's better than me just talking to people about how important it is to comply with the RRO. So people respond to different things. It was just another way of providing it.
I can see that a numerical or quantitative count might provide you with some information, but using statistics on status wouldn't tell you anything about the risk nature of outstanding items, whether they were high, medium, or low.
I can't really answer that.
Well, I'm inviting you to accept the proposition. That's right, isn't it?
Yes. The reason I can't answer it is because I thought that at some stage that's exactly how I did start presenting them, but I may be wrong.
Was there any mechanism ever put in place to review the fire risk overall of outstanding FRA actions on a building-by-building basis?
I don't recollect that there was.
No. So is it right that nobody ever actually looked at the outstanding FRAs as a group for a building and performed some kind of holistic assessment of the fire safety risk presented by that collection of outstanding items?
No, I don't believe we did.
Why is that?
Time.
Time.
Yeah.
You didn't have enough time.
I don't know where I'd have found the time to do that. I could see that there would be value in doing that, but I don't know how I'd have found the time to do that.
Could you ask Carl Stokes to do that, at least periodically?
He didn't even have access to our W2 system.
Why not?
Because he produces the actions. It's our responsibility to get on and get them completed.
Yes. That's rather what he said. So what I'm interested in is, why didn't you gather up all the outstanding FRA actions for a particular building, doesn't matter which, and then present them back to Carl Stokes and say, Mr. Stokes, you last did an FRA for this building 14 months ago. These are the outstanding FRAs on the building. Can you please give us a holistic risk assessment for this building based on this collection of outstanding FRA items?
I didn't do that.
No, but why didn't you do that?
I was busy trying to get the actions completed and treating that as my big priority and doing everything that I possibly could to get them completed. And I maybe naively hoped that we would be able to get to a stage where as many were completed as possible. And so I had hoped that what you're proposing wouldn't be required.
And do I take it from that neither you nor the executive team nor the board nor any scrutiny body within RBKC ever suggested, to your knowledge, at least, standing back on a building-by-building basis and looking at the collection of outstanding FRA items to perform a holistic fire assessment risk analysis?
Not to my knowledge, and it's actually not something that ever got suggested in any of the forums that I sat on with colleagues across the sector.
No. Did you present specific written or oral reports, or was your reporting all by way of provision of minutes of Health and Safety Committee meetings or Operations Committee meetings for the executive team to see?
I was occasionally invited to attend the executive team meeting if there was something specific that they wanted me to cover. That probably at some stage included fire safety, excuse me. Sorry. But I saw that, unless I was invited to attend, I saw that as being the executive director's responsibility. They're aware of what is going on. They've got the statistics. They've got the opportunity to speak to me about. They've been chasing their team leaders where there are stats, where there are actions outstanding. So at that level, that the conversations would be had with their peers. That was my understanding.
Right. Do you remember whether when you made minutes of Health and Safety Committee meetings and they were provided to the executive team, whether they were accompanied by your reports detailing the FRA action statistics?
I don't know the answer to that. I would certainly think that in Barbara's time, it's quite likely that they would have been accompanied by the papers that I prepared.
Yes.
And we were preparing an increasing number of papers in terms of all sorts of things. But I think that the last one, I think there were 3 individual fire safety related papers. So I would like to think, having gone to all that time and trouble, that they were provided, but it wouldn't be for me to confirm.
Well, you say that. I'm just interested because at the end of paragraph 14.4.1, you provide in your own fire safety strategy that statistics on status of all FRA actions are presented to the committees and the executive team on a regular basis. To your knowledge, did you prepare statistics on status of all FRA actions for presentation to the executive team on a regular basis?
Not specifically, because they generally would have been receiving what the Health and Safety Committee were receiving. My understanding was that when there had been a Health and Safety Committee, it would be agendaed on the executive team so that they could discuss what had been coming up at the Health and Safety Committee. And it was my understanding that the papers went there, but because I didn't sit on that group, it would be wrong of me to be saying it definitely happened.
To your knowledge, did you ever prepare statistics on status of all FRA actions regularly for the purposes of presentation either directly or ultimately to the executive team?
I didn't prepare anything specifically to go directly to the executive team, but it was always my understanding that they would receive the information that the Health and Safety Committee were viewing.
Right, but if you didn't compile the statistics on a regular basis for presentation to the executive team, would that not have been a departure from your own fire risk strategy, fire safety strategy we see here?
No, because the Health and Safety Committee were looking at them regularly, and there was an automatic escalation and feed into the executive team. So my understanding was if they'd requested it, they could have had more or different, but that was already in existence, had been scrutinised by the Health and Safety Committee, and would go to the executive team. I didn't, unless I was asked to, I didn't provide something specific for them. They would be looking at the same information.
Did you provide statistics on status of all FRA actions regularly for the H&S committee?
Yes.
So that was regular?
Yes. I can't remember when that started, but I think post W2 it was. I'd always been given feedback, but not sort of quantitative. Once I had the opportunity to do that relatively straightforwardly, then that's what I did.
So can we leave it like this then, that whatever statistics you prepared on a regular basis and provided either to the Operations Committee or the Health and Safety Committee, you assumed would be passed on in that form to the executive team?
Yes.
So that they could see the statistics directly?
Yes, and the fact is that the Ops group was chaired by Sasha Jevons, who's an executive team member, and the Health and Safety Committee by Barbara Matthew. 2 of the executive team had already seen them, so it really just meant having the same discussions with Yvonne and Robert, which I believe that they did.
Right. Now, I want to turn to the question of implementation timescales. Can I just ask you to look, please, at the first significant findings and action plan produced by Carl Stokes to accompany his 29th of December 2010 FRA for Grenfell Tower. This is at CST 403165. And we can see on that page there, if we can have it expanded, please, under the fifth entry down, priority timescales. Let's just read across together. High, 2 to 3 weeks. Medium, 1 to 2 months. Low, 3 to 6 months. You see that?
Yes.
Can you explain how those timescales for those actions came to be decided upon?
I can't. That, from my perspective, that was down to the assessor to set the timeframe. It wasn't for me to set the timeframe. He's the assessor. He knows what the priority rating is, and I thought that actually, I don't know what I thought. Those were his recommendations, and we just went with them.
I see. You see, Carl Stokes told the inquiry, it's day 37, page 36, lines 1 to 13. I don't think we need to go there. That these were agreed jointly as between the TMO and him and the LFB. Is that your recollection?
No, I don't recall ever having that level of detailed discussions with the LFB. I mean, I think they would have perceived that to be our responsibility, and we'd want to be assured that we weren't setting ridiculously long timeframes, particularly for high risk, but I don't think I ever recall having conversation with them about it.
Right. So this is the first time that you, so far as at least Grenfell Tower is concerned, that you saw the Stokes risk stages or
Yes,
levels.
I think
Yes.
so.
Yes. How then did you ensure that the actions were prioritised according to risk once you received this document?
To be honest, I don't think I allocated them in terms of you must focus on high and then medium and then low. I allocated them on the basis that these are all crucial. They've got corresponding timeframes, but you need to do them all, and that's always been my message.
So you didn't prioritise them according to risk?
Well, we did, in terms of we passed on the information to the people who were responsible for completing the actions. They were absolutely clear what the priority had been given, but they also knew my expectation was that they completed all of them in priority order where that was appropriate, but they needed to do all of them.
When you say in priority order where that was appropriate, it was always appropriate, wasn't it, because of the order of risk set out in this document?
Yeah. A point I'm making, obviously not very articulately, is that sometimes you would look at this and think, oh, that medium's really easy, I could do that first. That wasn't what I wanted them to do. I wanted them to do it, but if they had a finite resource, they obviously had to target the high risk. That was pretty evident to.
But let me just see if I can understand this. You wanted them to do them all, that I understand. But here you have a set of what we call FRA actions with 3 levels: high, medium, and low.
Yes.
Did you take any steps to make sure that the people to whom you were passing on these items for completion pursued a particular order according to the risk level?
I think probably the answer to that is no, because everybody who had actions were very clear and had been briefed on the process and briefed on the priorities and briefed on the timescales. And then when we went into the W2 process, we had a stakeholder meeting on the draft workflow where everybody was briefed again. So everybody with actions was absolutely clear. So I'm not sure what more I could have done to ensure that they targeted. They already were on message. They knew that's what was the expectation.
Right, so just take the first one we can see on the page by way of example only. High priority item 1, identified risk or hazard. You can see that in the box there.
Yes.
Holes through the fire compartment wall of the ground floor electrical room. Recommendation is the electrical wiring in the ground floor electrical room is checked by an electrician to see that no damage has been caused to the electrical supply of the building by the contractors. Did you would presumably send that to somebody for sorting out. Would you tell them that that was a high priority timescale and had to be done within 2 to 3 weeks?
Yes.
And how would you do that?
I suspect that when we started receiving the Salvas reports, I think what I possibly did in the beginning, and it's just so long I can't remember the detail, it's quite possible that their actions came in a spreadsheet, and I suspect that I sent the spreadsheet having identified the responsible department to each of those departments so that they could see all of the actions that related to them and the priority and the time frame.
Right. And how did you then ensure that the actions were actually or had been actually addressed and completed within the allotted timescale? In this case, 2 to 3 weeks.
And before W2, it was a challenge. But I know what I had sent them. I would chase with them. When we started to receive the Salvas reports, I met with the team leaders, Stuart Thompson, whose name you saw earlier, and some of his other corresponding team leaders who were getting the actions on, I think it was a 2-weekly basis, and we went through those schedules, those spreadsheets.
And what happened when an action was not resolved within the allocated timescale?
The only thing I can do is escalate it. I would obviously start with the manager and say, you do realise this is crucial, this is outstanding, and they may or may not give me what they consider to be a valid reason, and I would escalate. And I recall that Russell Thompson, who was the interim technical director at that stage, had been involved in the recruitment and procurement of the fire consultant, so was well aware of the need to give priority. And I would escalate it to my line manager as well, who was on the executive team, and I would keep doing that.
Now, can we go to the next action plan for Grenfell Tower, November 2012, at CST 403083? And you can see there that the priority timescales are now, for medium, instead of 1 to 2 months, it's now 2 to 3 months. And for the low, it had changed from 3 to 6 months to 6 to 12 months. Why did the priority timescales change?
I don't recall.
Mr. Stokes said that he changed it on the basis of the LGA guide being published and the timescales in there, but we've had difficulty identifying why that should be the case. Can you help?
No, I can't, I'm sorry.
Did you have any discussion with Mr. Stokes about why he had changed the priority timescales for Grenfell Tower, at least, in the way I've identified?
I'm sure any changes he introduced would have been introduced across all of his assessments, but he may well have spoken to me, but I'm sorry, I don't recollect.
Did you have any discussion with Mr. Stokes about those changes?
Not that I recall.
Did you notice them?
I'm sure that I would have done, but sorry, it's gone.
Just to be clear, had you or any of your colleagues asked Mr. Stokes to change these timescales?
No, that's absolutely not my role. He's the assessor. It's for him to set the timeframes, and it's for us to work to them and publicise them amongst our colleagues and make sure that everybody's clear about the deadlines.
Can we go then to CST?
Sorry, before we do that, can I just ask you, how did you understand these priorities timescales? What did they mean as far as you were aware?
I do recall conversations about, I had some pressure, shall we say, sometimes from colleagues who went, oh, but I've started this now, can I say it's completed? And I said, absolutely not. But I would have had conversations with Carl about when we could use partially completed. And I think what we agreed was, particularly with something that was going to be a challenge and quite a long timescale, if we had an order number and a start date and that sort of information, then that could be stored on the system, and then that action could be considered.
I think you're quite seeing my point.
Sorry.
What did you understand it to mean? Priority timescale high, 2 to 3 weeks.
I understood it to mean that from when I received the action and put it on the system, that there was 2 to 3 weeks. And
to do what?
Well, that's what I was trying to explain. That in my view, we were trying to complete them. However, in conversation with the assessor, his view was that in some cases we at least needed to be able to demonstrate that we had partially completed, we'd started the work, that was, I'm not fudging it.
Well, you are a bit, because it either means completed within 2 to 3 weeks or started within 2 to 3 weeks. Which did you understand it meant?
I understood that it was not possible to always complete in 2 to 3 weeks.
No, the question is, what was this telling you? Whether you could comply with it or not is perhaps a different question. What was this telling you?
It's telling me that I should complete within 2 to 3 weeks.
Right. Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's just that I understand the qualifications you seek to make, but I just wanted to understand how you read this, because we've had evidence from Mr. Stokes, and I wanted to know what you thought.
Yeah, no, sorry. I'm sorry if I misled you. No, that's from my view. In an ideal world, that's what we were working to, and that's what we should have been achieving.
All
So
right.
sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Right. So that's very helpful. In light of that, it perhaps clears up something I was going to ask you a little bit later. But can we look at the 2014 version of the action plan for Grenfell Tower, which is CST 403177. And here we have the record of significant findings and action plan, 17th of October 2014. And here now we see priority timescales, high 2 to 3 weeks, medium 2 to 3 months, low 6 to 12 months, as we had in the November 2012 version. But now we can see words in brackets after that, to start to action any works. Now, Mr. Stokes told us that it applied to all timescales, not just the low ones. Had you or your colleagues discussed this addition in the brackets there with Mr. Stokes?
We may have had conversations with him, but we certainly didn't ask him to incorporate this. I mean, he could see that some things were challenging, but we've probably reflected that back to him. But we wouldn't have requested that he put this in. This is his document. This was his jurisdiction.
Are you able to explain from your own knowledge and recollection why that text in those brackets was added?
No, I'm not. Sorry.
What it means, at least according to Mr. Well, what did you understand it to mean?
I understood it to mean that in situations where it would just not be feasible for procurement reasons or whatever to achieve the timeframes that are set by the priority, that we at least need to ensure that within that period we can demonstrate that we have sort of substantially put in place or started to take action, whether that be procurement or whatever.
Where did you get that understanding from?
I don't know. Sorry.
Okay. It meant then, didn't it, on the basis of what you've just told us, that the TMO was no longer required to complete and close off actions within the relevant timescale, as it had done in the previous 2 FRAs for Grenfell Tower we've been looking at, but now only to start them, or substantially start them, within the time frame?
No, my understanding and my interpretation was that it related to those where there was a significant amount of work. To go back to my original, to like Mun's Master Doors, that was something, there was no way that we could have turned it around anywhere near this. So something substantial and kind of just beyond the capacity to complete in that time. It wasn't applied routinely to everything. It should only have been those kinds of works.
But with great respect, it doesn't say that, does it? It says to start to action any works, not those works which Mr. Stokes should decide, because of the amount of work involved, could safely be started only within that period.
It doesn't say that. You're right. But I'm telling you what my interpretation was, and generally in the organisation, anyone with any queries would come to me, and I would tell them what I've just said. And to be honest, by then we're on W2 land, so I'm probably the only person who's seeing this document as it stands, because we're lifting the information out and putting it into W2. So that's not kind of widely circulated.
On the face of it, it means, doesn't it, that outstanding actions could continue indefinitely so long as the work was started but not completed within the relevant timescale.
Not to me, it doesn't.
No, but on the face of it.
Well, if you want to be really literal, then I suppose it
Right.
could. But my point is hardly anyone seeing that, and I'm not interpreting it that way. So
Does it come to this, that despite what the document says, you understood it to mean that a judgment would have to be made whether or not the works had to be started within the period or had to be finished within the period, depending on what the works involved were?
you could put it that way. I would
How would
say,
you put it?
I would put it that we were endeavouring to work to those timeframes, except in exceptional circumstances where it was just beyond the capacity because of significant factors.
Mr. Chairman, can I just finish off this
Yes,
line
do.
of questions very briefly, and then we will change topic. If you look at the last column, just on the screen in front of you,
Yeah.
date to be completed by, would you complete that routinely?
Once
Would you
we
fill it in?
Once we had the workflow, I wouldn't have used this other than just to scribble to my colleague, allocate this to this person, because all of the information would be on the workflow and could be extracted electronically. Historically, I would have filled that in.
And what
probably.
date would you have known to use?
Well, I would have used these timeframes, and then I would expect anybody with, if there were circumstances that I was not aware of, I expect people allocated those actions to be giving me those explanations, especially when I was circulating their outstanding list. They, ultimately Barbara was holding them to account and saying, well, why have you got this many, and explain to me, and I want to report on what those issues are. So it would be that point that we'd be able to identify any that just were significantly large or complex.
So in respect of any given FRA item, a judgment had to be made about the date by which it had to be completed. Is that right?
So, well, if that's what I said, that wasn't what I was meaning. What I meant was we were still trying to work to these timeframes, ignore what it says in the brackets, and when the allocations were done, then these timeframes were allocated. Because we were trying to be more rigorous about ensuring the completions and we're sending out regular updates and asking for explanations why things were exceeding those, sometimes it was at that point that people were saying, well, actually, that wasn't realistic because what you didn't appreciate was... So it obviously had to have the input of the people who were completing the action because they knew what complexities there were.
So does it come to this? I'm just trying to understand your evidence. Tell me if this is wrong. Okay. That you treated these priority timescales as the timescales by which the works had to be completed, save in a particular case, a special case, where the works, for good practical reasons, couldn't be completed in that time frame.
Yes, I wish I could have put it that way, but
and
yes.
You were the person who would make that judgment call.
No, I don't think I was, because I wasn't in control of most of the actions were allocated elsewhere. I was the person who would chase up and have discussions with people and help identify where that was the case or reluctantly accept. But it wasn't for me to make that judgment.
So who would?
Well, if it was a contract management issue, then it would have been the head of coming and speaking to me saying this is unrealistic because you weren't aware that we would have to follow all of these issues. So that would have been, generally would have been a dialogue with the head of the team allocated the action.
I can understand that person would have come to you and provided you with information, but isn't it the case that you would have been the person who would have analysed that information and just made the decision about whether or not it could still and should still be finished within the time frame or not?
I don't entirely agree because they're the technical expert and they understand the remit. I can go through what they're telling me and I can see whether legitimately it can be finished in the time frame or not, but I can't control the work. So if I accept that it can't be done in 2 to 3 weeks, I'm still saying to them, you still need to do it as soon as possible and you need to give me a time frame. But I can't control that.
And where you were unable to comply with the timescales set by the action plans, reading them as completion dates and not start dates, did you ever go back to Mr. Stokes and tell him that you've been able to complete a high-risk item in 3 weeks, say, and ask for his view?
No, I don't recollect, sorry.
Why is that? And why didn't you do that?
Run that by me again, please.
Well, we've got no record of you ever going back to Mr. Stokes and saying to him, we have a high-risk item here that we cannot complete within 3 weeks. What is your view about whether it's risky to...
Oh, yeah, we would have had those conversations, most definitely.
Right.
And sometimes I would have sought his view when I'd had a conversation with, for example, Alex. This is what Alex is telling me, you know, and in that case, do we need an interim measure? I mean, do we need to advise the brigade or you know, I would have sought, sorry, I'm a bit jaded today, apologies. Yes, I would have sought his view if I thought that it was a particularly significant issue that was going to be delayed excessively. So, yes, sorry. And that may have been verbal. Apologies.
No, that's very clear. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Yes. I think we ought to take a break now, Ms. Wray, so we will, and we'll resume, please, at 20 to 12. And again, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'd like to go to the usher, please. Thank you. 20 to 12, please. Yes, would you ask Ms. Wray to come back in, please? All right, Ms. Wray, ready to carry on? Good. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Yes. Ms. Wray, can I just ask you to look, please, at JW27, which is at TMO 0084 2277. I want to see if we can work through, by way of a worked example, how this system of prioritisation would work so far as you are concerned. Now, if you look at this is W2, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, it was generated in the summer or after the last FRA for Grenfell Tower on the 20th of June 2016. And you can see what's on the screen relates to Grenfell Tower. And under the process start date, you can see that there is a date of the 8th of August, yes? 2016.
Yes.
And was it you who entered that on the system, that date, do you think?
I can't remember if it was allocated automatically or if I just clicked on the date. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't recall.
No, was it you who pressed the button to put the date in the machine?
That's my point. I can't remember if it would automatically come up because that's a date that I'm manually inputting it. Sorry. It could have been me. I can't recall.
I understand. Now, the 8th of August is self-evidently some 2.5 months after the 20th of June 2016, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Can you explain why this process start date is being entered only on the 8th of August, 6 weeks or so after the 20th of June? Sorry, 1.5 months.
No. Did I receive the FRA on the 20th of June?
Well, it's dated the 20th of June. Let me ask you, would there normally be a time lag between the date of the significant findings and action plan generated by Mr. Stokes and it coming into your hands?
There wouldn't be much of a time lag.
No.
There would often be a bit of a discrepancy.
No, but a bit of a discrepancy. What sort of time frame? Not 6 weeks?
Well, no, I wouldn't have thought so.
No. Therefore, can you explain why it is that you're only beginning, it appears, on this document to enter the information into W2 some 6 weeks or so after the date of the FRA, even allowing for a short time lag between him generating it and you getting it?
I can't explain. What I would say is if I hadn't had the opportunity to put it into the workflow when I was going on leave or something like that, what I would have generally done would be send out the action plan to the teams and say this will be coming to you through W2, but this is to you can start working on it. But I don't recall, so I'm just speculating.
Now, if you look at the high priority ones,
Yes.
You can see that there's a column for priority high. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you can follow them down. On this page, on this screen, there are some 4 which are high priority, which fall into either miscellaneous or the inspection regime. Yes?
Yes.
If you look across to action,
Yes.
you can see that there's a description of each of them. Taking the I can't see it. Where is it? Page 3. Can we go to page 3, please? Yes. And look at the last entry on that page. Yes, you can see under action there that although this is high, it says the flat entrance door of flat 23 is damaged with the letterbox missing. You see that?
Yes.
This was assigned to health and safety. You, and you're named. You see that?
Yes.
The opening date is the 9th of August 2016, and the closeout date predicted or projected is the 6th of September 2016. You see that?
Yes.
6th of September, and the description of what should be done under action is that the door should be repaired and a new fire-rated letterbox fitted, alternatively a new self-closing certified 30-minute fire-rated door fitted with intumescent strips and coal smoke seals could be installed. installed. Response repair requested order number, and there's an order number. Yeah. Now, 6th of September, who chose that date? Would it be you?
I can't recall, but the 6th of September is against each of the high categories, isn't it? So I don't know if it's system generated or if I put it in.
Well, that's the question. If the system generated it, what would be the basis on which 6th of September would be picked, whether by you manually or by the system automatically?
I wish I could remember the detail. There was some detailed instructions which came with the workflow, which set out exactly the criteria and what screen to be, what needs to be entered in each screen, what's manual, what's computer generated, and I haven't seen them for ages.
You see, 6th of September is about 2.5 months after the 20th of June, which was the date of the FRA. Can you account for why this platform or document or database had the 6th of September 2016 as the completion date for a high-risk item, for this high-risk item?
No, I can't.
And we can see that there's no completion date, is there?
Well, there would have been. It's just that we didn't widen the columns because those asterisks will be numbers.
Right. Now, let's look then at the question of interim measures, which we touched on. Can we look, please, back again at your 2013 fire safety strategy, TMO 00830-598. And I'd like to get to page 10 in that document, please, paragraph 14.4.2. We looked at 14.4.1 earlier. Under 14.4.2, it says, where a high priority action cannot be progressed with the appropriate degree of urgency, such as where significant resources and or lengthy procurement are required, then interim measures to reduce the fire safety risk in the short term will be implemented. Specifically, these interim measures will be contingency plans instigated when fire protection measures are out of use, their repair is delayed, etc. Did that apply to actions which could not be completed within the timescale set by Carl Stokes in his significant findings and action plans?
It would not have applied to every action that was outside the time frame because it just physically wouldn't be possible to go through. It was aimed at sort of significant issues where there is going to be a delay. I can give you an example. We were doing fire safety works at Trellick Tower. Trellick Tower is a listed building, and we had to work on the corridor doors, which needed very specific bespoke hinges. So in the meantime, they were not behaving as they should. And we agreed with Fire Brigade in that case, the interim measure would be to install temporary doors in those locations. So in terms of significant risks, yes, that's what we tried to do.
Right. You say we tried to do. On the face of it, it looks as if a decision would have to be made on a case-by-case basis whether significant resources or lengthy procurement were required. Is that right?
I suppose what I'm suggesting is that where people, for all the reasons we said, if there's going to be a very complex issue which will cause significant delay, those are the ones we should be looking at as the initial priority, but there may be others.
Yes. And again, the other side of the coin of the decision that significant resources or lengthy procurement was required is that interim measures would be implemented. Yes?
Where they're required, then yes, they should be investigated and progressed where necessary.
Do you remember whether there were any FRA actions in respect of Grenfell Tower specifically where interim measures were implemented in accordance with this part of your fire safety strategy?
I think there were some okay. My recollection is that when there were problems with the ALV, which was either not working completely, not working comprehensively, or it was certainly potentially defective, that there were some interim measures discussed with the fire brigade, I believe, between Rydens and the fire brigade. There were a range of things where we tried to things like some just proactively increased the familiarisation, but also there were issues about being control of hot works. I can't recall. It was really for the project team to came up with a range of things. So I think there were. Sorry, I can't recall. What else? Can't recall the detail. Apologies.
Okay. But can we take it that the policy, at least, according to the 2013 fire safety strategy, was that where a judgment was made that because significant resources or lengthy procurement was required so that the high priority action could not be completed within the Stokes timescales, there would be interim measures put in place? That was the policy.
That was the policy, and they should be considered, and where appropriate, they should be put in place. Yes.
So does that tell us that for every red item not completed within the 3-week outer limit, because of special considerations, there would inevitably be interim measures in order to reduce the fire safety risk in the short term?
I don't believe that it was perceived they would be necessary in every case, but there should always be consideration given to whether it's appropriate to have interim measures and what they would be.
Now, can we go just briefly to Dr. Lane's report, BLARP 2, 5027, page 141. And near the bottom of the page you will see paragraph 8.2.37. And she, having quoted from the November 2013 fire safety strategy that I've just shown you, says that there was a stated commitment that contingency plans would be instigated when fire protection measures are out of use, their repair is delayed, etc. Now, and then she goes on to say, at 8.2.38, note, I have found no evidence of any such contingency plan being made by the KCTMO for Grenfell Tower. For example, the lobby smoke control system in Grenfell Tower was known to be non-functional for an extended period. See section 12 below in my chapter 7. In my opinion, if the arrangements set out in 14.4 were implemented adequately, this could enable KCTMO to comply with Article 9 of the RRFSO. Now, leaving aside the AOV, which we're going to come back to in detail later in your evidence, were there any contingency measures put in place in the circumstances described by Dr. Lane and indeed by paragraph 14.4.2 of your strategy?
I believe that there were, over the years, there were a number of interim measures put in place. I suspect there weren't as many as there should have been in as many circumstances, but...
Can you identify any?
Well...
Other than the AOV, can you identify any?
At Grenfell Tower?
At Grenfell Tower, yes.
Sorry, I just can't recall. I can't recall the detail of...
Would interim measures, which, as we can see, would be put in place where the high priority action could not be progressed within the time frame, be recorded anywhere in any system?
Not specifically, although I would have put details into the W2 system of anything that I knew I'd been made aware of was being put in place. I would have updated the information there.
We don't, I think, am I right in saying, see a column in WT?
No, there isn't a dedicated column.
No, so where would you put it?
So the last thing that you showed me, which actually had responsive repair and an order number, that would have been input by me as an update. I could have added any subsequent information to that box.
I see. So we would have to look in that column, would we?
Yes.
In order to find what interim measures have been put in place. Right.
And that's assuming that I've been advised of them, because I may not be.
Can you just help me with this? I think what you said a moment ago was that if there were a high priority item which could not be completed within the timescale indicated, that at least there would be consideration of interim measures and then possibly the implementation of interim measures.
Yeah.
How would we know whether interim measures had been considered? Was there any record of that?
We probably wouldn't. I might remember, but I don't know that there's an obvious place for that to be logged. I mean, obviously, in the specific example of Grenfell Tower, there's lots of discussion about interim measures in terms of the AOV, but I don't think that's even all captured in one location.
Yeah, but there was no system for, as it were, recording the fact that there was a high priority item and a decision being taken whether or not interim measures would be appropriate.
No, and that should have been somehow or other captured in the workflow. You're right, but I think it was an oversight, and yeah, I can't really give you another explanation.
All right, thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What follows from that, at least one thing that follows from that, is the question of whether Mr. Stokes was told of any decision to put in place interim measures where his timescales could not be met. Did you have a system for reverting to Mr. Stokes to tell him that although a particular high-risk item could not be completed within the 3-week outer limit, nonetheless interim measures had been put in place?
I would have told him verbally. I would have told him by email or on the telephone, because we would have probably started off having a discussion about what potential interim measures might be adequate. We would have usually engaged him in that process, so I think he would have been aware.
Right. Verbally, by email or telephone doesn't sound like a system. It sounds more ad hoc. Is that right?
Yes, probably.
And therefore things could get missed.
Things could get missed.
Now, I want to ask you some questions about backlog. Can I ask you to look, please, at your first witness statement at page 34, paragraph 151. You say there, the number of actions to be completed arising from the FRAs fluctuated, and inevitably at times there was a high level of outstanding actions. I found this could be challenging to resolve because, as mentioned earlier, in most cases the actions had not been assigned to me for completion. I often queried why actions had not been completed with the responsible team and was given a variety of explanations as to why they could not be completed more quickly. Now, you say that it was, or you found it could be challenging to resolve outstanding actions. Why was that?
I think I probably meant frustrating, really, because I was chasing people and meeting with team leaders and taking along stats and escalating further up the organisation, and I sometimes felt that things were still not moving as swiftly as they should. So it's the frustration in that it's out of my control, yet I really need to try and achieve it, and I haven't got control of it.
And you say, as I've read to you, I often queried why actions had not been completed. How were those queries communicated? Was that email or on the platform, or what?
A variety of ways. Again, I would often go and speak to people because I think when you eyeball them, sometimes you're likely to get more of a commitment. Sometimes we had poorly performing contractors, so we had issues which were challenging for the teams to resolve, or other things that I was not necessarily aware of because I wasn't in that team. I would go and speak to people. I would, as I've said before, I would have regular meetings, particularly with the head of the contract management team, probably every 3 weeks, something like that. But I would have a lot of dialogue with him in the meantime. I would escalate. We would have discussions at all of the committees that we've mentioned before.
You say you were given a variety of explanations as to why they couldn't be completed more quickly. What kind of explanations did you receive in general?
Sometimes it was to do with performance of contractors. Sometimes we had poorly performing contractors that we were trying to take action against. Sometimes it was that contractors were getting towards the end of their contract and were sort of a bit disinterested and quite challenging to get them to do what they were required to do by the contract. I can't really. I'm sort of answering on other people's behalf, really. So, I mean, I think
Well,
with
you're
response.
not really, because you received these explanations, and I just wanted to know what kinds of explanations you received.
Fair enough. So in terms of responsive repairs, I think we didn't anticipate the volume of repairs. We initially, I think we had outsourced the repairs to A. Williams or Morrison's or whatever. There was an external contractor. That was a difficult contract, and again, there were performance issues. Just various things like that, really. When I'd say, well, why didn't? Oh, well, we've got a subby and there's a problem with them, and we're recruiting. And there just seemed to be an endless sort of series of reasons.
They sound like excuses rather than reasons.
Well, I can only tell you what I was told.
Now, did you ever see any improvements to the backlog as a result of your queries and chasing up why it was that these outstanding actions couldn't be completed more quickly?
Yeah, and I think people were committed to trying to get the backlog down. It wasn't something they were blasé about. I think they were constrained by other factors, some of which I won't be aware of. There was a sustained procurement in terms of particularly contract management, but also I think in terms of subcontractors that Repairs Direct had access to. And things did improve, and they were definitely moving in the right direction. And we were constantly looking at how the actions were coming in and how we could. Did the process need more streamlining? Was it clear what the action was? Because I think as occasionally people would say, well, I'm being given a choice here. Surely the assessor should just say, do this. And my view was always that wasn't his role. His role was to say, this needs doing. These are suggested ways of doing it. For us, as a responsible person, we should have been deciding. However, there were kind of various things which were put to me, which were perhaps impacting on the number of outstanding actions, and I investigated and tried to act on all of them.
Yes. Now, when you say outstanding, just to understand what you mean by outstanding there, do you mean undone, or do you mean undone past the due date by which they ought to have been done?
I mean undone.
Right. So an outstanding action was an item one day after the FRA had been received, was it? Is that right?
Well, potentially. I don't see the value. It's been identified by the fire risk assessment as needing doing. I don't see the value in waiting for the 2 months or 3 months or whatever is up and then calling it outstanding. I was just trying to keep people focusing on the need to do them, and so I didn't think that would be helpful to differentiate.
But wasn't there a difference in your mind and in your approach between an item that was outstanding because you'd only been told about it the day before by Mr. Stokes on the one hand, and an item that was outstanding because it was past the due date?
Yes, I would have put a lot more rigour into everything that was beyond the due date. Right. However, I still looked at it holistically and tried to get the message across holistically. Right.
Now, I'd like to look with you at some of the actions taken to address the outstanding FRA actions in light of that qualification. Can we look, please, at TMO 1001026? This is a set of minutes of the TMO Health and Safety Committee, 26th of January 2012, and we can see that you are present there, is second listed. Can we go please to page 3, paragraph 8, 10th line, where you see that it is recorded as follows: Janice was continuing to chase up outstanding actions from the various FRA action plans, in particular from the high-risk programme. Unfortunately, a significant number of these have yet to be completed. You see that?
Yes.
When it refers here to the high-risk FRA programme, is the note speaking of the fire risk assessments completed by Salvus?
Yes, it is.
Right, and that concluded in about May 2010, didn't it?
Yes.
Yes. So is it right that even though the high-risk FRA programme had concluded in May 2010, you were still having a problem in completing FRA actions from that programme over a year and a half later?
Seems to be what it's saying, yes.
As we looked at before with the fire risk assessment that was completed by Carl Stokes in September 2009, on the 30th of September 2009, for Grenfell Tower, the timescales there required completion of actions at the latest for level 4 within 3 months or agreed plan within 6 months. We looked at that yesterday, do you recall?
Yes.
Can you explain, in light of that, and we can go back to the documents if we need to, but can you explain why there were any high-risk items at all still outstanding as at May 2010?
No, I can't.
And would you agree with me that even taking the latest date, you were 12 months behind in completing some of the FRA actions?
Yes.
Yes. Were you concerned by that?
Absolutely.
Did you identify what it was at the time that was causing the problem?
I tried. As I said to you, I met regularly with all of the teams who had actions allocated. I tried to figure out if there were blockages in the system of the things which were unclear, if we needed particular contractors that we needed to procure. And during this time, there was endless reports to the Ops Committee. Didn't have statistical breakdown, but said there are still issues that are unresolved. Some things were simple and were completed really swiftly, and some were not. Yeah, it was a concern for me.
Right. Did you raise the concern that you've just identified with Anthony Parks, who I think was your line manager at that time? You did. What did he do?
I'm not really clear, to be honest. I imagine, but I imagine that he spoke to, in the first instance, Sasha Jevons, who's the executive director for the Ops department, and all of these outstanding actions pretty much were within the Ops department. But I wasn't party to any of those conversations, so I can't really tell you for sure.
Now, there appears, at least on the face of this note or minute, to be no specific action agreed at this meeting for how to deal with this problem. Is that right?
Yeah, that seems to be right at that time, yeah.
Right. What action did you take yourself to try to resolve it, other than the general chasing up exercise?
Chasing up and escalating and raising it every opportunity and trying to get people to put it on their agenda, senior managers to acknowledge that this is an issue.
So was the problem that people weren't taking it seriously?
No, I don't think that is the case.
So why would you need to make sure that people would put it on their agenda and senior managers would acknowledge that it was an issue? Clearly it was an issue. So why would there be a problem?
The fact that it's being, sorry to talk over you, the fact that it's being discussed here, regularly discussed here, and it's an ongoing problem, and Anthony chairs this group and feeds into the executive team, and then the executive team know that we're not where we should be with this, and I just keep on hassling people because that's what I do, because I want it to be resolved. I want to figure out why it's not being progressed in a timely manner.
At this stage, did you begin to have a clue about what the real underlying problem was that was causing these outstanding actions to remain outstanding for so long?
Not consistently, actually. No. I mean, I know I keep harping on about non-performing contractors, but there were particular contractors where potentially a lot of actions would have ended up with them. So if they weren't performing, then that started to be a backlog very swiftly.
Right.
I can't really give you an explanation.
You mentioned reporting this up the stream. Let's look briefly, please, at the annual health and safety report for this period, which is dated 31st of March 2012. It's at TMO 100311072. And if we go to page 9 in that report, you can see there that you cover FRAs there. And if you look at page 9 and over the page to page 10, you see that you report action plans and what's happening in that respect. And then you say 817 on page 10 in the second sentence. In general, the recommendations which relate to neighbourhood management have been relatively straightforward and have been resolved swiftly. However, quite a large volume of technical actions which have ranged in complexity and in cost, and these have often taken some time to progress. In particular, some actions have required a capital budget, etc.
Yep.
And then at 8.1.11, you say, whilst progress to date has been worthy of note on the LFEPA's timescale for completion of the high and medium risk action plans items by July 2014, is still a long way off. A significant amount of work remains if we are to ensure that all actions are completed. Additionally, any further actions identified by subsequent FRA reviews must also be resolved swiftly. The continued commitment of staff and contractors will therefore be required. Two things following from that last paragraph. First, were you satisfied in your mind that you were bringing adequately to the attention of your seniors through this report the nature of the problem about backlogs arising from the Salvus report for the high-risk programme?
Possibly not. But this wasn't the only way that I was raising it with my seniors. This wasn't the only reference to it or the only time it had been escalated to them.
And secondly, in the last sentence there, you do say that the continued commitment of staff and contractors will therefore be required. Was that actually the problem, that the staff and contractors were not continually committed?
I keep coming back to contractors. There were often problems with contractors. And sometimes things that looked like they should have been easy to resolve. I recall around this time, we had problems with unserviced extinguishers, which should be the easiest thing in the world to complete. We had a PPM contractor in place, and it seemed to be really difficult just to get them to do what they're contracted to do. I don't believe that there was a problem with commitment of staff, other than some of them had lots of priorities and perhaps were focusing in on other operational responsibilities. That's always a possibility.
Yes. Yes, I understand. Now, can we then look on at the minutes of the next Health and Safety Committee meeting? This is 22nd of May 2012 at TMO 1001194. Let's look at page 1. We can see that you were there, as well as among other people. And if you look at the item 1 on the main points for consideration by executive team, you'll see the fire risk assessment programme for the low-risk properties is complete, with only 2 properties outstanding where access has not been possible, but lock changes are now being progressed. A significant amount of action plan items still need to be progressed. Was any action taken or decided upon at this meeting, do you remember, given that there were still a significant number of actions outstanding?
Lornette Pemberton obviously has apologised at that meeting, and she normally chairs that meeting and definitely fed into her colleagues. I don't recall. What I do know, what I've forgotten actually, is we used to highlight this ET to note, this executive team to note. We used to bring those points that if they for some reason didn't have time to go through all of the minutes, they should at least pay attention to those.
Right.
So the fact that it's the first thing on there, then it's something we want to bring to their attention.
I see. Now, can we then look at the minutes of the Assets and Regeneration and Repairs Health and Safety Group? We discussed that group yesterday and what it was. This is at TMO 1001850. And this is the minutes of that group of a meeting on the 13th of December 2012. And we can see that you were present.
Yes.
You see that? And if we go, please, to page 3, let's look at the middle of the page. You can see that there, under the heading Fire Risk Assessment Progress Update, Section 6, Outstanding Actions. A significant number of actions remain outstanding, which is a cause for concern. All were asked to ensure that these are progressed with action/progress evidenced and confirmed to H&S team ASAP. Action all. See that?
Yes.
Was it fair to say that for the entirety of 2012, which we've been looking at, there were and remained a significant number of outstanding actions?
It looks that way.
And did you raise that concern or problem with Anthony Parks?
Yes.
Yes. Anybody more senior? Do you remember?
I can't recall, but I may well have done.
Did any of your seniors propose a solution of any kind?
Not that I recall.
No. Now, can we then go to 2013, please? TMO 1000229. This is an email run, and I'd like to go to page 3 in it, please. And if you go to page 3, very top of the page, it's an email from Moira McGarvey at RBKC to Robert Black of the 25th of February 2013, subject Grenfell Tower issue. Now, you're not copied into this particular email, but if you scroll up to page 2, what you do get is the email from Robert Black to Sasha Jevons the same day. You see that?
Yes.
Yes. Now, do you remember any discussion between you and Peter Madison about this email, who's also involved in it?
I remember this issue.
You remember the issue?
Yes.
Let's look at Peter Madison's email on page 1. And on page 1 he says, Sasha, I've met with my team and Janice on this, attached are actions from the meeting. Ricky's team and RGE are working on a gap analysis of our fire equipment servicing arrangements by Friday this week, and we will know what we need to do to recover the position by then. Janice is pulling together a gap analysis schedule of fire risk assessment actions by Friday, and again, we will be able to action them. I've spoken to Janice and insisted that we have an opportunity to check that everything is in order ahead of fire risk reports being issued to residents or auditors being taken to site to inspect. It's clear that there is a weakness in our management arrangements. However, we must ensure that our systems and checks serve to escalate and resolve these matters within KCTMO rather than flagging them up outside the organisation. I think we need to talk to Anthony about how we control this in future. Now, can you just help us with why Peter Madison was insisting that his team have an opportunity to check the fire risk reports themselves before they were issued to residents or auditors?
Because Mr. O'Connor, Francis O'Connor, had requested I sent him a copy of the current fire risk assessment for Grenfell Tower, and I did. And it stated very clearly that Carl had identified some unserviced fire extinguishers in the plant areas, because that's the only locations that they were in, and some of them were marked condemned. And we'd had the fire risk assessment, I think, for a couple of months, and that had been escalated to the team who were responsible for the servicing contractors. And I had spoken to the head of that team a couple of times, but it was still outstanding. So having given the fire risk assessment to Mr. O'Connor, he did what Mr. O'Connor does and published some of it on his blog. And then that coincided with we were having an audit done by internal audit, Moira McGarvey's team, and Al Pesh, as part of the audit, always wanted to go and do a random selection of inspections. So he picked 3 blocks, a high-rise, a low-rise, and a sheltered or something. And my colleague Adrian would take him to the block, and they would do a sort of joint inspection. And unfortunately, that also demonstrated to him that there was a problem with the servicing of the extinguishers, and that was within the building services contract management team, which was part of Peter's team. In fairness to Peter, I think he'd only just started and been hit with a problem.
Right. Can you explain why? Well, first, do you agree with him that there was a weakness in the management arrangements?
Well, there clearly was a weakness in terms of the servicing and the management of the contractor.
And what did you take from him saying that the systems checks serve to escalate and resolve these matters within KCTMO rather than flagging them up outside the organisation?
I understood his position, but if you asked me whether I would do the same thing again, I would. If a resident asked for a copy of a fire risk assessment, I will give it to you.
You say you understood his position. What did you understand his position?
I think he was new. He came in and he'd immediately been presented with a problem. So from his perspective, it looked like we need to put our own house in order before we, and that's understandable. And if that meant that we were going to sort out the contractors and these issues were resolved, then I was completely on board with that.
Yes. It sounds from what you're saying in a very delicate way, perhaps, that he was against the sharing of the FRA with Mr. O'Connor.
I don't think he would have said that, but I think he was frustrated that I had done it, and I can understand why he was.
Yes, because he wanted to keep all the problems in-house without alerting the residents.
Well, I think he wanted to resolve them, but he'd only just started and he hadn't had the opportunity to.
Did you know that Mr. O'Connor might publish parts of the FRA on the blog when you sent it to him?
I thought it was possible that he would,
yeah.
But...
Now, do you remember that you, as part of this exercise at this time, agreed to produce a master list of FRAs?
Yes.
You did. And did that include the compliance, coding, colour and the details of the actions and works to be done?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. Let's look at it rather than guessing. CMO 1302288, please. Now, is that it? Is that the master list of FRAs?
Possibly. Sorry, I don't.
Well, sorry, you're only being shown the first page. Perhaps scroll down to. It's a long document, which is why I'm not showing it to you all. But if you scroll down the first 3 or 4 pages, you can see Grenfell Tower is item 2, November 2012.
Okay. It may well be.
Right.
Because it is prior to W2, so
Yes.
it was a challenge.
We've looked at it, and it's up to date up to February 2013, and has a list of FRAs for previous periods for lots of different buildings in the stock.
Yeah.
Was this the first time you had ever produced a master list of FRAs which included colour coding and actions and works required?
I wouldn't have thought so, but you probably know better than me from interrogating the system.
It looks like it.
Okay. Well, then, in which case, maybe it was.
Yes. Why had you not produced such a list before? Do you know?
I can't give you an explanation other than I had hoped that I would get a system which was much easier to manipulate than working off Word documents. But, the information was still being sent to the relevant people. It just wasn't all in one master list. I was probably working off it by property rather than...
Right. Did you prepare one of these documents for each of the teams? So, Regeneration, Building Services, and Contracts, Repairs Direct?
I can't recall.
Right. Did you discuss this document with Mr. Madison once you'd sent it to him?
I believe so. I think we may have had a follow-up meeting to that initial meeting that he referred to.
Right. He says he didn't recall seeing this document. That was his evidence at day 123, page 5, line 13. Did you send it to him or not, do you think?
I'm sure I would have copied it to him because he'd requested it. I would imagine that he would be expecting his team leaders, such as Ricky Sams, to get on and do the work that was required. But I feel sure I would have copied it to him since it was a request from him.
Right. Did you discuss it with Anthony Parks?
Quite likely to have, because
right.
Yes.
What happened to this? What was the upshot of your production and dissemination of this document that you've been asked to produce?
Can't really recall, to be honest. I'm looking at the dates and thinking that my business case. So W2 was definitely coming on stream, and we were required to produce a business case for any workflows that we needed. And I know that I documented in, I think, Health and Safety Committee in November 12 that I had prepared that with my IT colleague. So I'm thinking that this was superseded fairly shortly afterwards by the FRA workflow, unless I've got the dates wrong.
Oh, this is February 2013.
Right.
That's the date. We have on it through the document properties created by somebody called Alex Oney.
Yeah.
And I think you told us earlier that the W2 system came on stream on the 1st of August 2013.
That's right. We had a stakeholder meeting with all of the people who would be allocated actions in the May, and then we took on board their comments.
Right.
So I would imagine that I worked off this until that point in time, and then they sort of ran in parallel for a while.
Now, going back to the email run, this is TMO1002189. Can we go to page 2 in that email run, please? If you look at the bottom half of page 2, you can see that on the 21st of February 2013, Moira McGarvey sends an email to Laura Johnson, subject Mr. Francis O'Connor. And this looks like it was before your meeting with Peter Madison. And it's about his complaint. And she says, hi, Laura, I've just received a phone call from Mr. O'Connor, whom I have dealt with some years ago. He stated that Miss Rumble phoned him and was threatening him. Is it possible to provide me with an update on the situation with the fire risk assessment, etc.? I'm in the office tomorrow if it's better to meet. And that email got sent on by Laura Johnson to Celia Chaliscan. If you look at the top half of the same page, please, as you can see.
Yeah.
Could you ask Janice if she could give Moira an update on how the fire risk assessment programme is going, or from yourself if you have it? You see that?
Yes.
Did you explain that there was a backlog in completing the FRA actions?
Can't recall, to be honest, but are you
It doesn't
going to
look
show
like
me
you
one?
did.
Is there another bit of the email.
Well, we can scroll up to the top. If you keep scrolling up, Celia Chaliscan writes to you, bottom of page 1, over to the top of page 2. Would you be able to send an update either to me or Moira directly?
Yeah.
And then you write back to Celia Chaliscan on the 25th of February, and you say the fire risk assessment programme is going well. Was that true?
I think in terms of completing the assessments, it was.
The initial programme to assess the communal area of every block was completed in May last year. So it was going well in the sense of carrying out FRAs, but it wasn't going well, was it, in the sense of closing out actions? Because there was a huge backlog.
Yeah.
Right. Why did you not tell Celia Chaliscan at RBKC that although the assessment programme itself was progressing nicely, the FRA, the closing out of FRA actions was not?
I haven't got an answer.
You're not giving her the full picture, are you, really, by that first sentence?
It seems not.
Now, Matt Hodgson, we discussed him a bit yesterday. Do you remember that in September 2013 he produced the final version of his safety management review for Robert Black?
Yeah.
Now, let's look at that. That's a TMO 00873398. And if we go to page 4 in that document, this is under 1.1, objectives.
Mm-hmm.
And he says there, in the first paragraph, that the objective of this safety management review is to contribute to the success and continuing development of KCTMO by improving management control of health and safety. It's not the intention to identify failings in individuals, but to identify those parts of the safety management system, SMS, that require attention in order to bring about improvements in performance. And then he says this: the overall aim of the review is to provide an independent and objective assessment of the degree of implementation of the KCTMO health and safety policy and supporting arrangements. Do you know what it was that prompted Robert Black to request an audit of the health and safety management systems?
Yes.
What was that?
The limited assurance audit that we received from the internal auditors in the council. Well, I'm assuming it was. Sorry, it wasn't party to the discussion, but it followed on, so inevitably that was the case.
Right. For our record, let's have that up briefly. RBK 50313, please. That is the first page of the final audit report, draft circulated to you, and the final additionally circulated to Robert Black and Laura Johnson. Is that the document?
Yes.
So it was this document that prompted Mr. Black to commission the Hodgson safety management review. Yeah?
Yes.
Yes. Right. Now, did you see a final version of the Hodgson report when it was prepared in September 2013?
I will have done eventually, yes.
Eventually. How long afterwards do you think?
I'm not sure, because I wasn't party to the brief, so I wasn't ever really sure what Matt's brief was. And it was, I believe his work was commissioned by Anthony Parks, so he would have been reporting directly into executive team. So I'll have seen eventually. I don't know how long. It may have been almost simultaneously.
I see. Let's go back to the Hodgson report in its final version then. TMO 00873398. If you look at page 5, you can see that you were interviewed
Yes.
among a long list of others. If we go to page 8, as part of the summary, in the last paragraph there, it says, the governance of H&S requires a thorough review, as the responsibility for different risk areas sits within different departments. Due to the shortfall in compliance data sent up to the exec committee, there is a lack of focus and leadership in making the important changes or decisions to manage risk effectively. One such issue is the completion of actions resulting from statutory reports, such as the fire risk assessments. The business needs to decide who has the authority to enforce this process. And then over the page, the competent person sits in the H&S department, providing H&S advice and strategy to the TMO. However, it is felt that there is a requirement to support the head of contract management within the assets and regeneration team in relation to technical compliance, i.e. a source of strategic support in relation to the planned preventative maintenance programme for technical services across the estate. This would cover such issues as life safety, Legionella, pressure systems, fire safety equipment, etc. Discussions are ongoing within management in relation to this additional support. Looking back at the bottom of the first, of page 8, the first part of that paragraph I read to you, did you agree at the time with Mr. Hodgson's assessment there?
Yeah, I think I did.
Did you agree that there was an issue about who had authority to enforce the process for completion of FRA actions in particular?
Well, there seemed to be, yeah.
Do you know why there was an issue or problem in that respect?
No, not really. I mean, he's right in that most of the operational teams responsible for delivering were obviously within the operations department. Health and safety sat within finance and ICT. My understanding was that was a deliberate decision so that we would have a bit of autonomy from the operational teams, which would give us distance and would mean that we could there'd be a degree of auditing which was facilitated. I wasn't able to influence the backlog in the way that I would have wanted, so I think there was definitely some disconnect.
And who was actually enforcing the completion of FRA actions at that point? It sounds as if it was you.
It was me, but
Right.
yeah, it was me.
So why did the business need to decide who has that authority?
I think what he was meaning is there needed to be more kind of high-level support. I sit very lowly in the organisation, and I think without high-level support, then people may or may not be taking on board my priorities and my insistence. I'm only speculating, really. I can only give you my.
So was it your view when you saw this document that actually the problem lay in people not taking you seriously enough because you were too junior?
I think there's maybe an element of that. That's not the whole story. No. And people did have lots of conflicting priorities. There was quite a lot of work going on in terms of re-procuring contracts to make sure that we had good contractors performing to the right specifications. So, and also we had just started W2, and there was a lot of development going on in Keystone. So there were a lot of initiatives which were in place and ongoing, but hadn't yet completely got to fruition. So understandably, staff were probably quite stretched and were working on those, hopefully so that the end result would be we'd all be in a better position in relation to fire risk assessment actions and other items. But it was definitely a sort of transitory period.
Yes. Now, did any of these conclusions I've just read to you, looking at this paragraph, come as a surprise to you at the time?
No, probably not.
No. Had you raised any of these concerns with Anthony Parks or the executive team at any point before September 2013?
Anthony Parks had been chairing the Health and Safety Committee, and he knew and understood that we still had problems with fire risk assessment actions, and he knew where the lion's share of those sat, and he was aware, and we would have no doubt had conversations as well.
Now, can we look at the initial draft of this report, which was published or circulated on the 19th of July 2013. This is at TMO 100031124. And you can see the date in the middle there, for the attention of Robert Black, copy to Anthony Parks and Angela Bosniak-Sekerez. And if you go to page 8, please, we can see in the last paragraph on that page, here he says, the governance of H&S requires a serious review, etc. And then if you look 4 lines down at the end of the line, he says, this issue is not helped by a breakdown in communication between the H&S and other departments, specifically in relation to the completion of actions as raised in statutory reports. Do you agree that there had been a breakdown in communications between departments in relation to the completion of FRA actions?
No, I don't agree.
Do you know how he came to that conclusion?
I worked quite closely with Matt and was interviewed by him at length, and he knew that I was frustrated, that I was unable to influence it more than I had, and to get more actions completed. And he knew the efforts that I was trying to make. I don't believe there was a breakdown in communication, but there was definitely frustration.
Right. Going back, if we can, please, to the final version of this report, TMO 00873398. Page 31, if I can go to that page, please. Paragraph 31. You can see there that he deals with fire risk assessments specifically and the programme, and he looks at the completion rates. And he says in the last paragraph on that page, as you can see that in the last line, with regards to high priority items raised in FRA reports, the following completion rates are documented from 28th February 13 to 17th July 2013. And then over the page, top of page 32, you can see the figures there are set out. And if you look at those, it shows that assets and regeneration surveying, fourth group down listed, had completed 7 from 18 only. That's some 39%. And assets and regeneration building services had completed 110 from 324. That's 34%. And he goes on to record underneath those statistics as follows: assets and regeneration have expressed some concern regarding the validity and practicality of some of the remedial works raised in the FRA reports. This issue was raised at a meeting of 15th August and is to be investigated in more detail in consultation with the contractor. Can you comment on what the concerns of the assets and regeneration team were over the validity and practicality of some of the FRA actions raised? What is your take on that?
I think I've referred to it earlier that where there are alternative ways of achieving what was required in terms of compliance, Carl would have been inclined to put both of them down. Sort of Peter and some of his team preferred to be instructed what to do, because they saw that as a more rapid way of being able to procure the works and get it in place. So we had discussions about that. I know that there were ultimately some issues. There were some sprinklers installed in some basement conversion flats, and there were issues about how we could maintain those to comply with the requirements of the manufacturer's instructions, etc., and get the sufficient degree of access. And it was something it wasn't a lot of actions, but it was difficult to get resolution on. So it was a variety of things like that. So in order to make sure that nothing we were doing was impacting on these negatively on these response rates, we did tease out what it was the issues were meant to be, or that they were concerned about, and we worked with Carl to see if there was any way of streamlining the process.
Right.
And ultimately, I think they were happy with. I don't believe we did a lot of tweaking, but sorry.
It sounds from that evidence that Peter Madison, at the very least, was looking to Carl Stokes to advise about how to go about performing the remedial works, and not simply identifying what had to be done.
There was a little bit of that, yeah.
Yes, I see. You can see that there's a reference here to a meeting of the 15th of August 2013. We've been unable to locate any documents which refer to or record what happened at that meeting. Were you aware of it?
I actually can't remember at this stage. I know when anything was expressed as a blockage to getting things completed, I would have acted on it really promptly. But I don't know if that meeting happened on that date or subsequently. Sorry.
You can see the recommendation at the foot of the page. If we can scroll down to the foot of page 32, please. It says, under 23, investigate the assets and regeneration concerns in relation to the recommendations raised in the FRA reports and seek opportunities to simplify and streamline the process. It was understood that a consultation with Carl Stokes and Associates was to be arranged. Do you know whether a consultation with Carl Stokes was actually arranged?
Yes, it will have been. I can't remember the dates,
right.
But it gave him the opportunity to explain why he was expressing things in the way that he was, and I think it was probably quite a good opportunity for Assets and Regen to say, what they were having problems with. And we just all wanted to get it clarified so that we could move forward.
Well,
really.
let's be careful here. Do you recall such a meeting?
I think I do.
You think you recall. Either you recall it or you don't. You may recall it vaguely. Even vaguely, do you recall it?
Yes.
Right. Do you recall even vaguely what was discussed?
Not the detail, but really just what I have summarised.
Right, I see. Do you recall whether anything was actioned or any action points were decided as a result of that meeting in order to resolve the issue?
I don't remember the detail, but I remember that we took on board, Carl and I tried to take on board the concerns which we thought were could legitimately be incorporated into the assessments without reducing their validity, I suppose.
Right. And what was done to simplify and streamline the process? Do you recall?
Actually, no. I mean, the process stayed the same. It was really more about the descriptions of terms, because the process was very much based on the W2 system, and there was no alternative system, and it worked. So that process stayed the same.
So when you say that Carl and I tried to take on board the concerns we thought could legitimately be incorporated into the assessments without reducing their validity, are you saying that Carl Stokes went away and produced a clearer set of instructions about what should be done by way of remedy in the case of FRA actions?
I think going forward, I think sometimes Carl doesn't always communicate in writing maybe as effectively as he could, and I think going forward he took that on board. There may have been specific examples, but I can't recall what they were.
Do you remember whether there was any improvement in the completion rates of outstanding FRA actions by the assets and regeneration team, either surveying or building?
Yeah, but I believe the building service definitely started to improve.
Right.
But and I think that's partly, probably to a lesser extent, based on this discussion with Carl, and to a greater extent because they were re-procuring contracts and were very clear with their specifications, and they had a resource where they could manage those contracts effectively.
Now go to page 10 of this document, please, which is back at page 10, and look at the main recommendations. Priority 1, you can see, I'm sorry, we're going to have to, yes, that's right. Recommendation, you can see at the top of the screen, the main priority 1 recommendations with suggested timescales are as follows. You see that?
Yes.
And then you can see timescale in the right-hand column, immediate response. You see that?
Yeah.
And then 3 months to agree fine-tuning import data and agree outputs. That's another one. And the recommendations then stated the following: take action to resolve the volume of outstanding actions. This is item 2. Unresolved in statutory reports, especially in relation to fire risk assessments. Once the backlog has been brought under control, establish a process to monitor and track completion of report actions as matched against priorities identified in the reports. And that one's been given an immediate response for the first sentence and a 3-month period to resolve the backlog so far as the second is concerned. You see that?
Yes.
Do you remember what your response was to that finding?
I think I was quite glad that he put it in writing, because it would be something that the organisation all throughout the organisation would have to sign up to.
Right. Now, there was a recommendation, as you can see here, to establish a process for monitoring and tracking completion. You see that?
Yes.
Once the backlog was under control. Did you implement that recommendation yourself?
Well, it was really linked, as I've said, to running reports, improving the management information that was being provided to the Health and Safety Committee, and holding people to account.
Right. What did you actually do mechanically in order to establish a process to monitor and track completion of report actions as per this recommendation?
Well, I was running reports on at least a 2-monthly basis and allocating them to the individual team with detailed breakdown of where their position statement was in terms of completions and non-completions. And then they were discussed in detail with an overarching summary which supplemented those at the Health and Safety Committee, which at that time was becoming stronger. And also it coincided with the start of the Operations Health and Safety Group. So
right.
that all of the heads of contracts, repairs, whatever, and housing management were sat in the one forum under Sasha, and that was one of their
right.
standing agenda.
Now we know, because you told us earlier, that the W2 system started on the 1st of August 2013. That's really between the July draft and the September final version of this report.
Yes.
Did anything change in relation to monitoring and tracking completion of report actions as a result of Mr. Hodgson's final September 2013 report?
I think we were just more rigorous and about sending them out on a regular basis and providing better information for discussion at all of those various forums.
No, that's a bit, great respect, a bit vague. He's recommending that you establish a process to monitor and track completion of report actions. In and after September 2013, did the TMO, did you establish a process to monitor and track completion of report actions?
I did not produce a document that said this is my procedure, but that I've explained to you what I did.
Right. I repeat the question, did anything change in the process for monitoring and tracking completion of report actions as a result of the Hodgson report?
I can only reiterate that I think we became more rigorous about what we had in place, and we looked to refine and continue to refine the information provided so that senior managers could make better scrutiny of it.
Were you able to bring the backlog under control within 3 months?
I can't recall, but I doubt it.
And did you raise your inability to do so with anybody senior to you?
Always.
Did you ask for more resources, either in personnel terms or money terms?
I don't recall. I suspect not, because there wasn't any more money to be had.
Did anybody tell you that? Did anybody tell you, I'm sorry, but we can't establish a process to monitor and track completion of report actions because we haven't got the budget for it?
No, nobody did tell me that.
So this was your assumption, was it?
Everybody in senior management has a copy of this report. We're discussing it and we're tracking progress with it. And at no point is anybody getting any extra resource across the company.
You see, they might reasonably say, well, we relied on Janice to tell us if she didn't have the bodies or the money in order to carry out what Mr. Hodgson had recommended. Now, why not simply go to them and say, well, I don't have the bodies and the money. This requires a new process over and above what we have. I need to put it in place. Please help me.
And I may have done that. I just can't recall doing it, so I have to err on the side of assuming that I didn't.
No. And we've certainly seen no record that you did. Now, on the same page, item 3, just looking a little bit lower down, it says, develop the technical services dashboard so that it covers all plant and equipment risk that the KCTMO is exposed to across the estate. This should tie in with the H&S policy arrangements. The dashboard should generate data on statutory risk assessments as well as test and inspection outputs associated with mandatory and best practice requirements such as British standards and approved codes of practice, ACOP. Now, this recommendation indicates, do you accept that the dashboard should generate data? Yes?
Indeed.
Yes. And that would include FRAs as statutory risk assessments, yes?
It would have done, but it didn't at that point because the dashboard didn't talk to the W2 system. It talked to the Keystone system. So in the first instance, and this was all under the control of the contracts management team, and they worked on electrical installation, gas servicing, lifts, and a whole range of things. And it was always anticipated that that would include the fire safety maintenance contract, but that hadn't come on stream.
Right. Did the dashboard ever talk to the W2 system?
Not to my knowledge.
Wasn't that a problem?
It was, but at least we did have a W2 system. So yes, it wasn't ideal, and it's something that I think we would have tried to iron out, but for the time being, we had two systems and we tried to work with the data on both.
Yes. Who would access or use the dashboard, the technical services dashboard, normally?
I think they had it, actually, ultimately they had it up on a screen in the office so that everybody could see it in the technical services office, but it was largely the contracts management team. It reflected their performance of their contracts.
Right, I see. But if it didn't talk to the W2 system, then you wouldn't know whether performance of the contracts, as indicated by the dashboard linked to the Keystone system, was the problem in, or creating a problem in closing out actions identified in the and the date by which they had to be completed in the W2 system.
Indeed. And partly, when we were devising KPIs, we tried to make sure that we covered both bases, so that we had the dashboard information, we had the statistics that we referred to in terms of fire action, we had a whole load of other things as well, and we'd identified what we wanted to record in terms of fire safety, servicing, inspection, maintenance. But that had not come on stream because, well, I don't know, the technical services would have to explain to you that that was the contract that was let at the end of the process, and I think they just hadn't quite got there.
Right. I mean, you can see from this recommendation that Mr. Hodgson is recommending that the two all be tied in,
Yep.
so that you get a single set of data.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that never happened.
It didn't happen.
Why not?
Well, I'm not technical, so I can't give you the reasons. It didn't happen, and I can only explain what I've explained before, that there were two systems, and to the best of my knowledge, didn't talk to each other. Technical services concentrated on getting the dashboard going for the areas of compliancy that were, and we're working towards it.
But you were in charge
You're
of
going to
health.
have to slow down a little bit.
Sorry. So sorry.
You were in charge of health and safety, and you were the competent person for the purposes of the RRA. Was it not essential for you, in order to be able to discharge your personal functions, and for the TMO to discharge its statutory functions as the responsible person, to make sure that this recommendation was carried into effect as best you could?
All I can do is tell you that I was trying to work, in the absence of having this technical capacity, which was out of my reach, we were trying to work with the systems that we had.
But that's the point. Why? Given that you were told you shouldn't, and you should unify all the systems. My question to you is, why didn't you do everything you could in your power to make sure that those to whom you reported understood the seriousness of not carrying out this recommendation?
I'm confident that I will have done, but as you saw how long it took us to purchase software in order to have a workflow system, those kinds of decisions don't happen quickly, and budget isn't readily available for them. So in the absence of that, I was trying to do the best I could to comply with the information that I had.
You say those kinds of decisions don't happen quickly. This one didn't happen at all, did it? No.
Actually, I think it's something that you should ask contract management about, because they dealt with the dashboard and they will know what conversations they've had and what hold-ups there were. And in an ideal world, I would know, but I don't know the detail. I'm sorry. Sorry.
Now, were you yourself asked to implement any of the recommendations in the Hodgson report?
Probably. Training matrix was, training matrix definitely. I'd have to scan through. I can't recall it at the moment, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, it's 5-1. I'm anticipating the witness might need a slightly earlier break than perhaps we ought to take normally. I could finish this topic in 5 minutes, but it's unlikely.
How do you feel? Have you got?
I'd rather finish it, if you don't mind.
I'm sorry, what?
I'd rather finish it if you can finish this topic in 5 minutes, I think I'm happy to do that.
Well, let's see. Yes, do carry on.
Yes, interesting. Right. Yes, well, let's do that. Can we go then to see how this developed? TMO 1003604. Now, this is a meeting minute for the Operational Health and Safety Committee of the 12th of September 2013, at which you were present, and you can see that under introduction it says, the purpose of the meeting is to review the current health and safety procedures and enhance current processes, ensuring the correct members within the organisation have the appropriate management strategies and the necessary resources in place to meet compliancy. Do you remember whether this meeting was summoned in response to seeing the draft Hodgson report from July 2013?
I think it was created, I think this group was created as a result of the Matt Hodgson report and also the audit.
Right. The reason I'm slightly cautious about that is because the date of this meeting is the 12th of September. That's the day before the final version was produced by Matt Hodgson on the 13th. So at that stage, you've only got the draft. But nonetheless, you think that the group was created in response to the draft?
I think so, because I'm sure that would have been discussed at executive team level.
Right. Do you remember whether the meeting had the draft Hodgson report before it?
I can't recall.
There's no indication that we've been able to see in this note or minute that there was, or it was. Can we then go down to page 3, please? And under agreeing agenda, can you see that?
Yes.
It says under paragraph 2.2, JW, that's you, explained that she felt much of the H&S approach was reactive and responsive rather than proactive, and was in line with budgetary implications, and felt there was no assurance that agreed actions were being met going forward, i.e. void standards, fire stopping, and felt processes needed to be put in place to confirm things are effectively progressed and concluded. What led you to raise those concerns? Do you remember? Was it sight of the draft Hodgson report?
Not especially. Cultures of organisations change, don't they, over time? And I felt like, I felt like sometimes people relied on Adrian and myself as being health and safety and didn't always integrate health and safety effectively into their role. And I actually felt that the Hodgson report and the per audit rating was an opportunity, and so I felt like it was my opportunity to say that, and I'm glad I did.
Right, and what did you mean by in line with budgetary implications?
I think in terms of budgetary implications, I think I was referring to kind of health and safety matters that Adrian would identify on his inspections. I think for a period we were because budgets were extremely tight, there were quite rigorous definitions of repairs. And if you reported something that was very clearly defined as a repair, then the chances are it would be progressed. If you reported something, for example, if Adrian came back and said, this is how we do this, but actually I think we should replace that or improve that, often that was classed to be an improvement and there was no perceived budget for that. So I was sort of flagging that up to say, sometimes we need to think outside the box or perhaps review our approach to that.
And was the point, put shortly, that you felt that much of the H&S approach was governed by budgetary constraints?
I don't know that I would say much of it, but it was certainly an issue, and sometimes an issue at relatively low level. So it could be quite frustrating that you couldn't put in place things that could obviously improve situations.
And was budget or budgetary constraints, to some extent at least, causing a problem in getting to grips with FRA actions at this point?
Actually, no, I don't think it was budgetary. I don't think that was the issue.
Right. Mr. Chairman, I've got one more meeting to cover. I could probably cover it in 5 minutes, and then we change topics a little bit.
Right.
Not
Could you
greatly.
Yeah.
I'm happy to take a break now.
Yeah, that's fine.
Right, keep going, Mr.
Well, I will. Thank you. TMO 00847277. This is the minute of the TMO Health and Safety Committee operational meeting, as it's called, operational health and safety meeting on the 17th of January 2014. So not the TMO Health and Safety Committee, but the operational Health and Safety Committee. And if you go, you can see you're present there. If you go to the bottom of page 1, if you scroll down to that, please, you can see that under matters arising, 4th bullet point down, it says, The fire brigade haven't come back with dates for visiting. They have said that they're interested in seeing the W2 workflow process and looking particularly at any outstanding FRA actions which relate to compartmentation. Janice has been asked to talk to Michael about the information they will be shown, as they will be looking to make sure that we are completing the actions, which means they will be looking at things in more details. Now, Michael is Michael Lyons, isn't it, I think?
Yes.
Why did you need to speak to him about the information that the LFB were to be shown?
I have no idea.
Let me suggest one and see what you make of it. Was it to control the type of information that the LFB would see?
Well, it would have been futile because I wouldn't have let that happen.
Right. If we go to the top of page 2, next paragraph, it goes on. At the moment we are working from the fire risk assessment reports and have until June to complete all actions. Michael suggested that the fire brigade be advised of the volume of outstanding FRA actions. However, consensus of the group was that this would result in more scrutiny from the LFB and also possible enforcement action, so agreed we would not disclose this level of detail at this stage. Do you remember what Mr. Lyons' particular concern was?
I don't. I presume it was, just as he says, the volume of actions.
Right. Did you think it was appropriate not to inform the LFB of concerns over the volume of outstanding FRA actions, simply to avoid proper scrutiny by the brigade?
No, of course not.
No. We don't see any record of you objecting to that approach.
I didn't do the minutes.
Did you object to the meeting?
I certainly wasn't the consensus of the group, so I'm
Right.
sure I would have done.
Right. Would you have seen this minute and in draft form before?
No.
No. Right. Do you recall expressing objection to the appropriateness of the approach contemplated by Mr. Lyons?
I can't say I recall, but I'm confident I would have objected.
And looking at the next bullet point, you can see it says, there was further discussion about the fire risk assessment process and Janice agreed to set up a meeting with Michael and our fire consultant so that he could be fully briefed and would have opportunity to raise any concerns. Do you know why that meeting was needed?
I would be speculating, but I would think it may have been because we were putting pressure to get the outstanding responsive repair items. Actions completed, and that he may have had an issue with, again, he may have had an issue with how they were drafted or how they were presented, or I don't know really. I'm sure it was all in order to progress outstanding actions.
Do you remember whether a meeting was set up with Michael Lyons and your fire consultant, that's Mr. Stokes?
I don't recall. I suspect it would have been, but I don't recall, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Yes, I think it is. Thank you very much. Well, we'll have a break now so we can all have some lunch. I'm going to say return at 2:05, please. And remember not to talk to anyone about your evidence over the break, please. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. 2:05, please.